Everyone, I'd like to ask you all to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, our first item is public participation. Marilyn, do we have anyone signed up for tonight's first session? Okay, there will be another opportunity at the end of our agenda before we adjourn. Our next item and our first agenda item for this evening is the 2024-2025 staffing sectioning overview. And for that, we will go to Director Ed Petruski.
Thank you, President Aubert.
Thank you.
As we do every year at this time, we bring some items to the Board of Education that relate to sectioning of courses and ultimately staffing of certified staff and instructional aid staff for the upcoming school year. This year is no different than previous years, and that will start out at tonight's board meeting when we do an overview of sectioning and staffing for 2024-2025. Beginning really with the start of second semester, our student services team, in conjunction with our division chairs and our associate principals, worked with our students to work through course enrollment for the upcoming school year. That culminated with our central leadership team meeting recently to review course section numbers. And at this time, we are recommending to the board an overall instructional increase of 1.3 FTE. FTE, for those that aren't familiar, stands for full-time equivalency or full-time employment. This sectioning represents course selections for the 3,781 students that are currently registered in Infinite Campus with requests for next school year. Now, we know that number will fluctuate between now and the start of the school year. We will have students who will move in, students who will move out of the districts. But in terms of the sectioning numbers, that was the number that it was based on. For comparison's sake, for this school year, we have 3,703 students registered with courses for the 2023-2024 school year. So we do see an increase in students between this year and next year. An incoming freshman class, which is just shy of 1,000. I believe it was 993 when we checked. In addition to the increase in students with request, a large factor in the overall FTE increase is the continued expansion of both the multilingual department courses as well as co-teaching offerings within our special education department. As we discussed last year, we do anticipate the need to increase the number of bilingual and multilingual certified staff to serve as co-teachers in many of those multilingual department courses. Because of the co-taught nature of those courses, what our language arts division chair will be doing is putting those courses along with the other division chairs into the schedule and seeing how our 4 current multilingual teachers would be able to overlay those courses and then determine what our additional needs would be. Last year at this time, we thought that we might have had a need for up to 6 multilingual teachers for this school year, but based on where courses fell in the school day, it was determined that we were able to provide all of the coverage with 4. We are anticipating approximately 2 additional multilingual teachers for next school year, although we won't know the exact number, whether it's shy of that or a little bit more than that, until the courses are placed. We will return to the board and let them know what those numbers look like so the board has an accurate representation of that FTE. Additionally, this request of 1.3 FTE does not include any of the certified FTE that any of the additional certified FTE that we are discussing in later proposals tonight, namely the interventionist room. As well as that overview tonight, the board will also receive recommendations for capstone courses and enrollments under 18, which is the next item on the agenda. This information is incredibly useful because we section and we staff based on students in seats. So we know that for every class that we are offering to run, we then need to have a certified staff member to teach that. Should there be any changes to those recommendations of capstone courses or enrollments under 18, that would change that overall bottom line number of 1.3 FTE and would have we would then have to look into different departments and divisions to make sure that we have adequate staffing moving into that next school year. The ultimate recommendation and approval for the capstone and enrollments under 18 would be presented at that March 18th board meeting. We continue to work with the associate principals and division chairs to determine if there's any changes to course section recommendations, and then we would provide any necessary updates to the Board of Education. Finally, the board has historically approved 0.4 FTE for the administration to allocate on a discretionary basis should there be a need for additional sections of a course due to shifting enrollments. Generally, those shifting enrollments or those needs would take place over the summer when there haven't been board meetings, and for the sake of expediency, that discretionary FTE would then be allocated by the superintendent on the board's behalf to allow us to begin to place students into classes and find adequate staffing for those sections. This past year, we used 0.3 of that allotment. 0.2 of it was for special education, and 0.1 was for language arts due to some shifting enrollments over the summer. Should there be a need for more than that 0.4 FTE allotment, we would then return to the board with a recommendation for additional FTE. I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have about the staffing and selection, or the course sectioning and staffing process for the 24-25 school year at this time.
Ed, can you just real quickly share a scenario that might come up that would require us to use that discretionary FTE?
Absolutely. Generally, where that will happen is where we have courses that are reaching their course size limits. And I brought up special education in the past. Special education course sizes are dictated by Illinois school code. And so if we have students, let's say, that move into the school district, or their needs change based on meetings with their IEP team, and we don't have sufficient seats available in a class, it might be needed that we open up a new section. At that point, we would utilize that discretionary FTE. We did have a situation about 8 years ago where between August 1st and the start of the school year, we did have 50 students who moved in and enrolled in the district. 50 students at 7 classes a day, that is a significant impact to any sort of staffing model. We were lucky in that situation where we had open seats in many of the courses where students were looking to take, but we did need to come back to the board, utilize some of that discretionary FTE, and then come back to the board for some additional sections. But they are not sections where we are just looking to create. They are all based on student need.
Questions from the board?
How many sections is a teacher required to teach in a day?
A full-time teacher would have 5 instructional periods in the day and then 1 structured study period during the day.
Okay. So is the 0.3 then, would that be 1 class and 1 duty, or would that be?
No, those would all be instructional periods. Yeah, the FTE is not allocated for any sort of supervision duty.
Okay.
So, for instance, when we allocated that 0.3, 0.2 of it was for special education. It was for an annual course. I believe it was an English 1 cross-categorical class. So that would be a teacher teaching 1 section of English both semesters. And then the English, the other 0.1 was from the language arts division. That was for a semester elective for second semester where we had some. So
they'd have 2 class periods 1 semester and
Yeah.
1 class
And then
period
one
the
the
second
second.
semester.
That makes
for a
sense.
total
Okay.
of 3.
Thank you.
absolutely.
Other questions by the board? This is a first reading.
So I just wanted to clarify that for the courses, I think it's page 72, under 18 enrollment report, I'm just confirming that these are, even though they have low enrollment, they're capstone courses, they're staying, and some of them where it's like 32, 33, those are 2 sections, right? Okay.
Absolutely, yeah. That's the next item on the agenda, and I'll give a brief overview of those. But you are absolutely right. I mean, that gets factored into this, and I did bring it up, so it is fair game to talk about it. Absolutely, right? But yes, you are correct.
Go ahead, Michael. Yep.
No, that was the exact same question I had.
So maybe like any questions about the overall process?
Oh,
and then Ed can
okay.
get
I thought it
into
was
the-
all roped
Sorry.
into one.
No?
I did too.
All right.
Sounds like it's time to talk
Go
about the
ahead and-
capstone
Sounds great.
number 18 report.
And this is an informational item, so there's no action on this initial one. Then on page 68 of the board materials, we do begin the process of discussion of capstone courses and courses with enrollment under 18. Capstone courses are courses that are traditionally the end of a sequence of courses. So if you think in art, a student that might take beginning drawing and painting, intermediate drawing and painting, and advanced drawing and painting. Advanced would be that capstone course, or it might be that AP Studio Art. So these are generally not courses that are standalone without any sort of course scope or sequence. When possible and when enrollment is sufficient, we would like to run these capstone courses because students have dedicated numerous semesters of their high school career to take the courses along this sequence, and we would like to see that paid off at the end with that student being able to take that culminating course. Now, as you can see in this report, that we do have some capstone courses that have some lower enrollments. That is typically what you are going to see in a capstone course because there is some level of attrition that naturally happens in any sort of course sequence. But we're also discerning about that, and if it is a situation where there is very low enrollment and it's just not feasible to run it, sometimes we do make those determinations to not run the course. But when at all possible, we would like to run that. You'll notice, and this would be on page 70, you'll notice in that capstone summary on that very first page, under Family and Consumer Sciences, you see early childhood education internship of 11 students. That is part of our career pathways. So while it is 11 students, we do want to run that because that is one of our established career pathways. These are students who have taken Child Development 1, Child Development 2, numerous courses within Family and Consumer Sciences. We do want to provide them that opportunity for an internship in an early childhood education program. You'll notice the numbers in music. And you'll also see this as it relates to the courses under 18. Many of those courses are courses where there is enrollment by audition. So concert choir is a course where students would audition to be in other choirs. If they make those choirs, they would be, let's say, in treble choir. They wouldn't be in concert choir. But if they don't make treble choir, then they get moved into concert choir. So this number will be much larger than 18 by the time all those sections are filled, or all those seats are filled. If you scroll down and look to world languages, you will see things like French 5, and it says LIV, that stands for Level 4, and French Language AP. Oftentimes, when we reach the end of a course sequence, you may see numbers that wouldn't merit or wouldn't warrant a standalone section, but especially within our languages, we will combine sections into a class. So French 5 and French Language AP have been taught in the same section for many, many years. Our teachers are very familiar with how to teach that as a hybrid class. So those two sections, one is 13, one is 8, they are often combined together, and in this case, it would be one section of 21. And those are just a few highlights of the capstones. Are there any questions about capstones before we move on to enrollments under 18?
I do.
Sure.
Just curious, for the Family and Consumer Sciences, how you noted there's 11 for early childhood and 18 for teaching internship.
Yes.
Isn't the early childhood required for the teaching internship class?
Those are two separate career pathways.
Okay.
They're both in our teaching. They're not two separate pathways. They're two separate strands of that same pathway. Early childhood would be things like preschool and early childhood education settings. Elementary would be grades K through 6. So students are choosing which path that they would want to go. The prerequisites for both are the same. It would be Child Development 1, Child Development 2.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay. Then moving on to enrollments under 18. Enrollments under 18, first off, you may see some of these same capstone courses that we just talked about because they may have enrollments under 18. But generally, courses with enrollments under 18 that we are bringing forward to the board for approval are broken down into 3 main groups. The first group are courses that have healthy enrollments and multiple sections that are being offered, but just by the nature of the division into sections, you may have fewer than 18 as an average. An example could be a class that has 34 enrollments, 35 enrollments. That's more enrollments than we could have in one section, so we would want to run 2. The division would say if it's 35, you'd have one section of 17, one section of 18, an average of 17.5. That would show up on our courses under 18. We consider those courses to be healthy, strong enrollments, and just because we have more students than seats in a section, that's how they fall onto that list. The second part of that, or the second grouping, would be capstone or specialty courses that are given special consideration when determining which courses are run year in and year out. Specialty courses may include courses that aren't at the end of a well-defined sequence, but one where the course provides a unique opportunity for students. We see some of those, generally you see those in elective areas. For instance, WLTL radio and podcast. That provides a unique opportunity for our students, something that many high schools don't offer for their students to be able to enroll in. We want to continue to support those classes when we can. So if possible, and if the enrollments are close to 18 and not at that point where it is very few students, we would like to run those. We'd also see those in areas like music theory AP. That in and of itself is not the end of any sequence, but it is a very specialized course within music that we would like to run even if it is lower than 18. We also see the same thing in art history AP. That is a course for students in our art program that might not be your traditional art students, but are interested in the history and the cultural relevance of works of art, and so they may take art history AP. That is a class we would like to run when possible. And then the third group is a course that has a value or a connection to subsequent courses in the sequence. We just finished talking about capstone courses. So we use the capstone course of art, beginning drawing and painting, intermediate, and then advanced. If we have, let's say, 14 intermediate drawing and painting students and we decide not to run that course, we are essentially cutting off that sequence midstream for the students who began it at beginning, and they might not be able to complete it. So we give serious consideration to courses that are contained within a sequence, or the closing of that class would have ramifications for a student to be able to take a capstone or possibly an AP course. In this group, we also have those situations where we might have multiple courses that are combined into one class. We see that in the freshman level choirs, freshman boys choir, freshman girls choir, and freshman vocal tech, where those all have small numbers combined together. It's a larger class size. We put them all together into one section. You'll see those in Creative Writing 1, Creative Writing 2. I already gave the example of French. So there are some courses in there where sections are worked together into the same period so that we are allowed to provide that opportunity for students to enroll. At this time, I'm happy to answer any questions that the board might have about the courses under 18.
So I have something that's confusing me.
Sure.
So on page 72, you have under 18 enrollment report, what you were just talking about. What's the difference between the requests and the under 18 enrollment report?
The request is just the number. All of these are requests at this point because the classes have not been created and students haven't been assigned to them for next year. So technically, they are still a request in the system.
Oh.
So these are the number of requests that students had. So looking at that list, let's just jump. Let's look private
That
private
one, for example.
pilots is 32. That's on the report because we have two sections of it, and it's technically under 18.
One of them is going to be
Correct.
under 18. Okay.
It's the average.
It's the average,
Based on
correct.
second, the average is under 18. It's not the total under 18.
No, thank you for clarifying.
Absolutely.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Right. There's a lot of combinations that go into play with the under 18 report and how a class can go into under 18. You'll also notice, I mentioned earlier about special education courses and how those class sizes are dictated by school code. All of those class sizes are under 18. So we did not include any special education courses on this, any multilingual courses, because those by design have class sizes that are under 18. The district has already committed to
Yeah,
running those
they're
courses.
exempt from-
Correct,
yeah.
because those have special circumstances which are going to have them under 18 just by the nature of the course or constraints that we've created.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Other questions?
So when does it, I mean, for some of these classes, like when I'm looking at, for example, like you have the advanced culinary arts, we have 283 kids, so, students registered for that. So at what point, because I know my kids had tried to register and different classes were filled. So how is that determined for something like the advanced culinary arts? When you have so
what?
many sections?
And that's a capstone, and I think that's actually a typo. Let me look at that. That could have pulled the wrong thing. Advanced Culinary Arts actually has, where is that? That is.
Because I know culinary arts was always a hard class. That's why they would take them over the summer doing
Yeah.
that.
Right, that is a capstone, so that we would run that. So what we would do is we would look to see if we have to make any determination of who would be in a course and who wouldn't. We would then give preference to students who wouldn't be able to take that course and make that determination. Does that answer what you were looking for?
Well, no, I mean, I guess like how many, so one for the classes, how many students are maxed out in a class?
It depends on the courses. Courses that are general education classes, for instance, I taught math, a geometry class that I would have taught. Our negotiated agreement talks about an overall student roster size of 130 students. So dividing that into 5 sections, it's 26 per class. But we do have lab classes where it's 24, culinary labs that would be at 24, applied technology, it's a little lower. So each course has its own.
It's a variance
Correct.
of it, okay.
Correct.
Are you asking, like, when would we say this course is full?
Right, like,
for a
what if you
student?
had 500 kids that wanted to take it, I mean, advanced
We
culinary
need to
arts?
hire.
Well, that's an
we would
excellent-
Try to hire more teachers,
right.
right?
You would try to accommodate
Well,
as much.
we have to look at constraints. So we've had that situation because of the success of our yoga and our strength training classes.
That would be a good
We
example.
don't have enough room in yoga studios to be able to accommodate all students who want to take yoga. So what we need to do in that sectioning process is work with Kurt Johns, our division chair, to determine how many periods of yoga could we run, if all things were great. If we had, an ideal setting, and he said we could run 30 sections of yoga throughout the year. So then we would look to see, did we have more than 30 sections worth of students? And if we did, then we would give priority to students who couldn't take it again. We would then also look to make sure there's room in other PE electives to provide some overflow for those. So generally, you'll see those constraints, Jill, in specialty courses. You won't see them in a geometry. As much as I love math, you're not seeing a lack of spaces to teach geometry, but you will see in things like LTTV, radio, culinary labs, art classes, science.
Offer
labs,
as many sections as students were willing to take that you could accommodate.
that we could accommodate. That is correct.
Got it. Okay, just to have a better
Absolutely.
understanding of that.
Yeah,
after
but I've
today,
seen,
if we
like-
get a lot of changes, we can't.
Right.
What'd you say?
But after today, if we get a whole lot of changes or a whole lot of people that move in, we've already decided what we're staffing at. So that's where we use that extra FTE.
Correct.
To put for.
Right, but I've seen like where like when my son was here, like he tried to register for psychology and then it was full. And so he wasn't able to take it like that semester.
There are certain cases where, where we might have to limit enrollment, just looking at the overall size and scope of FTE. So we might have, let's say, a situation where we have 31 students who want that class. And we know, we would love to run 2 sections, but trying to balance everything out, we know we can't in that case. So we may say this course, and I don't know if that was the situation with your son's course, Michael, but we may say this course is only going to be available for seniors. So then juniors would then, because they would have another opportunity to take it that
Right,
next year.
okay.
Or it could be, there are always conflicts in schedules. No matter how much we try to eliminate that, our master schedule is a giant puzzle. And so there will inevitably be classes that are offered at the same time during the day because of other constraints. And you may have a student who has requested to be in both of those courses. They can't then be in both of those courses. So what they'll need to do then is work with their counselors to go back to those alternate requests that they had and see if there's still availability in those, right? So while this process is somewhat culminating tonight, it is certainly far from over with the counselors, the associate principals, and the division chairs, because they will go to place classes into the day. That's really that next step. We don't anticipate that based on those steps, we would be coming back to the Board of Education and requesting additional FTE. But there could be some situations, I'm thinking, if there are serious constraints or conflicts in the day where we might have to be creative about it.
And I might have missed this, but can you talk about the physical welfare class, PE modified 9 through 12?
Absolutely.
What's that?
Modified PE is a course that we offer in conjunction with, sometimes it's working with students with IEPs. Sometimes it's working with students for whom a traditional PE class might not be the most ideal setting for them. And so we know that at the time of enrollment, those enrollments are going to be very small, but that will build enrollment as the school year grows, because we want to be able to provide all of our students with a safe and comfortable PE class that they would be able to take.
Okay. And then I imagine that with the increase in enrollment, the increase in co-teaching classes, and otherwise your 1.3, is it?
Mhm.
Increase FTE. This is I would imagine it's very similar to what you have done in the past in terms of amount of sections that are under 18. Is this pretty standard?
It is pretty similar. We do not approve all sections that are under 18. The way that the process works is I will go through every division, essentially every class, and come up with the number of sections that we are going to allocate. Dr. Tyrell and her team, the associate principals, also do the same thing. And then we get together and we compare and we work with the central leadership team to determine these are the classes we are going to go. There may be a class that's at 13 that I recommend not running, and Dr. Tyrell and her team are saying, we would really like to run this for these reasons. We then have that conversation to determine if we're going to run that. No one side really trumps the other. We work collaboratively with that. But for this list of all of the courses that are under 18, I wouldn't say there's an equally long list, because that certainly wouldn't be the case, but there are courses that would have been under 18 that we chose not to run because we know that for numerous reasons we just don't have the means to run every course that we would like to run.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Instead, and looking at the history, there's no, I mean, and I totally appreciate and understand that you combine courses when possible. There's no really way to look at this and say, in 2022, 23, we had X amount of classes that ran under 18, or, you know, historically that way.
The way that the report is run, there isn't, and the difficulty with that for the under 18 is that the under 18 lists can change drastically year to year. It's unlike the capstone courses, which are established capstones, so it's easy to find enrollment history for those. We may have a course that's under 18 this year that hasn't been under 18 for 7 or 8 years before, or courses that were under 18 and then now aren't. So there isn't a lot of longitudinal data that is consistent for all of these courses, because it is entirely dependent on year in and year out enrollments for those.
Okay. So in the end, from year to year, like, do you ever bring the board information about this year? After all of enrollments, we ended up running these courses as under 18.
Well, that's what this is. That's what this report is.
But this is just projected. Things could change before.
Well, there
this
wouldn't
is
be
just-
any courses, there wouldn't be any additional courses under 18.
So you feel like this is pretty firm, and if anything, that you might get a couple that
Right,
are
and-
move out of it, but.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
And what we will do between now and the time of the regular board meeting is review this list, see if there's any shifting enrollments on there and go from there. But I don't imagine that there would be any additional courses under 18. To follow up on that process that I was just talking about with what I do and what the building team does, the student services division, namely the counselors, work very hard between the time when Infinite Campus closes and the time when sections are finalized to close out classes that don't have sufficient enrollment to allow students to find other classes. So there aren't going to be classes hanging out there right now with an enrollment of 10 that aren't on that list. Our counselors have already worked to move students out of those. So,
Gotcha.
yeah.
I'm surprised AP Physics 1, 15?
AP Physics 1 is a little bit unique because that is an AP Physics 1 that is at South Campus.
Okay, so
So the North Campus version of that is very healthy. We have very strong enrollment in that. When we first started offering AP Physics 1 at North Campus and South Campus, we did have smaller enrollment at South Campus. These are students who are ready from that science curriculum background to take an AP course, generally as sophomores, so it's a smaller pool of students. And in the first year, we had planned on running it, having students commute over to North Campus and having everything here. We decided against that, and we decided to just create a standalone section at South Campus. So for something like that, that's why we wanted to do that. There's also another one, if you look on the last page, you'll see Spanish 3 ACP.
Mm-hmm.
Spanish 3 ACP, that is our Indiana University course, right, Scott?
Yep.
Yeah, so ACP, and it's also level 5, so those are students who are at the honors level of Spanish. Typically, students who are going to be in Spanish 3 at an accelerated or honors level are students who have begun Spanish at that middle school. So they're generally taking Spanish 3 at South Campus. This is a North Campus class. So again, just like the kind of the converse of what I just talked about with physics, we would not want to have all of these students then have to commute to South Campus. We would lose students in the commute because they couldn't make it work. And so we want to be able to offer students that opportunity to take that Indiana University dual credit class. So that's why it has a small enrollment.
Got it. Yeah, and I appreciate that you're looking to minimize students going back and forth
Absolutely.
between the two campuses. I think there's already enough constraints
Mhm.
in how we can select classes because of the two campuses. So
Yeah.
whenever we can take those barriers away, I think it's
Absolutely.
fantastic. Okay. Other questions? All right.
So then this will come back to the board on March 18th. If there are any changes to any of this information, I'll certainly make note of that when we present it again.
Okay, thank you so much, Ed, and I think we're going to start with you.
Absolutely.
And
And
go to our next item, which is Math and Science Division restructuring proposal.
thank you. And for these next two, I'll do the introduction and then turn it over to my colleagues who can certainly share more information about these. But as a brief introduction for this divisional structuring recommendation, tonight and at the March 18th board meeting for ultimate approval with that recommendation, we are presenting the board with a recommendation to separate our current math and science division into a math division and a science division. As the structure currently exists, the math science division contains approximately 65 certified staff members. It's the largest division in our district. The separation is focused on three main areas, as outlined in the board materials: the division size and balancing with other divisions, and supporting both Strategic Plan Goal 1, which Scott will talk about, and the Certified Professional Appraisal System as well. And as I said, this information can be found in the board materials, and we will certainly welcome any questions the board might have. But I'll turn it over to Scott to talk a little bit more.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about this for quite a while for a number of reasons. If you look in our Goal 1, we're looking specifically at math, English, and our science scores. It's one of the major ways of measuring Goal 1. And essentially, we've had one chair who has been overseeing both the math and the science. And as we've been going through the curriculum review and really trying to see what we can do to ensure more students are learning math, getting caught up from pandemic-related math losses, and also to encourage students to be in science classes beyond the minimum requirement, and evaluate 65 people. It's a large task for one person. So really, in making that split, we're interested in having the time and having a person who can spend more time on the curriculum and more time on the supports and the instructional strategies, so that more students can improve their math and their science, rather than having one person doing all of that. Now, our current chair does have two assistant chairs, one who is primarily assigned to science, one who's primarily assigned to math. So this would give the split, both the new chair and the existing chair and assistant chair, and that puts them, it's actually going to split it just about right in the middle, just given the numbers that we have. We have one teacher that sort of straddles both departments. We have that in other areas as well, so we don't see that being a problem either. Really, just as we look at wanting to make some changes to math in making it much more hands-on, much more, really as the teachers are giving more instruction and more instruction to mastery, which is a part of our curriculum review. We need the time for professional development there too, and this would give that chair the time to do that. Something very similar with science as well. Over the last few years, we've added a number of North Campus science courses. We really, as we go into that curriculum review, need some focused attention on how those are scaffolded and how those are articulated. So really, it's something that from where I sit, which is why I've been advocating for this, it's the right time to do it, and it would give us the opportunity to really focus on those two curricular areas that are, two of the three significant measures that our kids in our school are measured by.
Questions from the board?
I think it makes sense. Thank you very much.
Great.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think especially post-COVID and the scores that we've seen, it makes a ton of sense. But just for clarification, they have a full release?
All our chairs are full release chairs. Yeah.
Okay.
The assistant chairs are teaching 3 periods and have 2 periods of release, but the chair itself has a full release.
Okay.
What do you
other-
mean by that? Maybe I'm
Sorry,
missing that.
They don't teach.
They don't teach.
a class.
Okay, that's what I
They're
thought.
full-time
Okay, I just wanna
Full
make sure.
release to evaluate, work with staff.
And they can like go and observe the classes? Okay. I just want to make sure.
What's a little different at LT than other schools, and part of the reason why, which is the reason why they have a full-time release. In many other schools, it's building administrators who do the bulk of the evaluations, and that's not how we do it here. We do it by that department, by that division. And so that, again, gives greater feedback to the specific content area.
Makes sense to me.
I was thrilled to see this recommendation. It makes so much sense, and I'm glad to see those numbers back in balance between those two departments. So we would still keep the .4 assistant division chair in each, one in science, one in math, and it's just it's an add of a 1.0
Correct.
FTE. Great. All right, so we're going to see that on March 18th.
See that again on March
as well.
18th?
Okay, and then Ed, we're going to stick with it, and our final HR agenda item is the proposal for the intervention room.
Thank you, President Aubert. We do have one additional staffing request. This, again, is also for additional FTE. This was the request that I alluded to previously when I was talking about the 1.3 FTE. We are also recommending the creation of a restorative intervention room that would be staffed at each campus, and we are making a recommendation for the staffing of that it would be certified by, or staffed by one certified staff member at each campus and one paraeducator at each campus. That certified FTE of 2.0 that we would be adding ultimately would then be added to that 1.3, which the board has already been made aware of for that overall number. Information about this recommendation can be found in the materials that were provided to the board, and we welcome any questions the board may have. At this time, I'll turn it over to Dr. Tyrell if there's any, or I'm sorry, to Dr. Owens for information.
I just wanted to provide kind of the greater context for the recommendation, and then Dr. Tyrell is going to talk more about the planning and the logistics and the detail work that the building team has undertaken to put the proposal together. But really, this comes out of our strategic plan goal 2, where we are looking specifically at student supports and our learning environment, culture, climate, and looking at our metrics that relate to that. So student behavior referrals, 9th grade on track, and really our overall culture and climate. Like I said, we have metrics that are looking at that. But the strategic plan certainly guides us to want to make sure that students are feeling like they are engaged and belong here at school, and that we're doing all kinds of restorative measures to ensure that students, if mistakes happen, are able to understand, repair harm, and move forward, all the while still maintaining their academics and not being removed. So that also ties into our discipline improvement plan, which we presented to the board in February, I believe it was. And again, we were flagged, so to speak, on that discipline improvement plan based on the disproportionality of our out-of-school suspensions, but that the plan also measures just our overall suspension rate and exclusionary discipline. And again, as we move to a more restorative culture in general and looking at student discipline from that restorative lens, we want to make sure that we have the tools on campus that we need in order to do that and to be able to work with students proactively prior to any, a behavior infraction occurs, but then also if those infractions occur, how do we make sure that students are able to get back into the fold really quickly and not miss a beat. So the BLT, as I said, Dr. Tyrell will go into the logistics and planning, but myself and Dr. Rowe have been working with the building team to provide collaboration and thoughts and ideas and just kind of kick around the proposal that Dr. Tyrell will be able to explain in more detail.
Thanks, Dr. Owens. As Leslie shared, herself and Dr. Rowe has spent a significant amount of time with the building team as we've developed the proposal that we shared with you within your packet. Through our time in developing the proposal, we engaged in collaborative book reads, studied research, reviewed data, studied intervention rooms that exist at other schools and districts, and engaged in site visits as well. A primary goal of this intervention would be to reduce both exclusionary discipline and the number of students who reoffend, while also proactively connecting with students to try and reduce behavior instances that would have resulted in in-school and out-of-school suspensions. Instead of assigning consequences that remove students from the school environment, a restorative intervention room would provide opportunities for students to take responsibility for their actions, as Dr. Owens shared, and repair harm that has occurred while also receiving social, emotional, and academic support. The proposal for this space and this position will impact, as we shared, our suspension and in-school suspension program. So it'll be an alternative to suspension and a more robust in-school space that really focuses on restoration and academic support. There's also a proactive component to this proposal, which we really like. This person and this space will be an opportunity to work with students who hopefully, right, like who hopefully will not get to the point of exhibiting behavior instances and infractions that would have resulted in in-school or out-of-school suspension. So the proactive component is really important. We also envision that these specialists would work very closely with our building and district leadership teams to provide training for staff on restorative practices and really help us build that overall restorative culture. And then the supportive follow-up component is also really important. So we envision that if a student does exhibit behaviors and ultimately end up spending some time in the restorative intervention room and working with the specialist, that student would become part of that specialist caseload, and follow-up would be ongoing throughout the year to support that student as well. So those are three main components of the work of not just the space, but the position. Within your packet, you've had the opportunity to review the responsibilities that we've outlined for the specialist and also learn about the schedule, the draft schedule that's been created, and that I'm sure will evolve if this proposal is approved and we have the opportunity to build this out. I'm sure that schedule will evolve as well. We're happy to answer any questions that you might have at this time.
So what if the student does not want to attend?
Yeah, there's a couple different options for that, Michael, and we're still talking about that. There are districts that mandate participation in an intervention room and intervention space. There are also districts that have these types of spaces that don't mandate participation and allow for student and family to select an out-of-school suspension. We would lean towards really working with the family in a collaborative approach because we believe in the learning experience that's going to happen in that space. But that's one of the details that we'll have to work out as we're planning for implementation.
Is that what you're thinking, Michael? Like if a student says, I just suspended?
Yeah, I mean, because like,
Yeah.
you know,
That's a good point.
they could decide that they don't want to go through the 5 days or so in, or 3 or how many ever days in school with the restorative room or practices. And so then what are the consequences then?
Yeah, well,
That's what, you know.
Yeah, we treat every situation individually. Certainly, right now, we've had great success. One of the alternative to suspension programs that we have in place is our Rosecrans program. We've had really great success with working with families and students and explaining the benefits of the program and getting them to make that commitment. We envision that we will have pretty good success getting students and families to commit to utilization of this space, this intervention, these resources. And it'll be important that we're able to articulate exactly what the experience is going to look like for students and families. We need to talk about the why and talk about the perceived benefits. So, but we will be working through that over the course of the next several months. There's several details that will need to be worked through if this proposal is approved. You know, different agreements, agendas for re-entry meetings, agendas for reintegration meetings, intake meetings. All of those things are things that we'll be planning for over the course of the next several months leading up to the start of the year. We have a general framework, but there's things that will need to be detailed out. We're going to be writing accountability projects. So, working with our team to write projects that students will be able to engage in the event that they do experience some significant disciplinary incidents, so that there's a learning opportunity within this space. Those are examples of things that we'll be working on over the course of the next several months leading into the beginning of the year.
I just wanted to add just a little bit of that, just from, Michael, for 10 years, that was kind of the world I lived in. And I found that most families are appreciative in contrast to their kid being outside of school and not having the support that they need. Because sometimes they have those situations and they'll ask us, why can't you make them do this, like in the classroom, whether if they mess something up to be able to fix that. And so now this is going to allow us having people there to support process through with the students so that they understand and have the ability to come up with a way to restore the harm and reintegrate into their community and bridge that. So just in my personal experience, in a role in a space like this, rarely had families that refused that. And so most of the time, they've been very appreciative of having the student in school and also having those wraparound services that can help their student understand the harm that they created and come back into their school. And that should alleviate that distance, meaning we're not pushing a student out, but we're calling them in.
Go ahead.
I really appreciated having this schedule. It really helped me, bring this to life, like what this looks like in practice. But I don't have a point of comparison for what does in-school suspension look like today for our students?
So right now, the way that it exists at our two campuses, our students who are serving an in-school suspension are in our general study hall room. So certainly there are opportunities for them to connect with the assistant principal, connect with the social worker, work on some level of accountability, reflection, work on their academics, but it's not as supportive. It's in a general study hall with a study hall supervisor, and any point of contact with any of our student support team members, or if they did have contact with the teacher, which isn't as cohesive as we envision with this program, it really is a pull out or push into that study hall. So this gives us a dedicated space to be able to go hands-on in our intervention with our students. So we believe that that's important as well.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, a couple questions. I mean, I really like this alternative. I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around it better.
Sure.
So, you talked about an example when you were answering Michael's question of how it's effectively working. That's an example of restorative practice. Can you help me understand that?
Yeah, I just was giving an example. Michael asked about, families' willingness to engage in participation. And so I used an example of an alternative to suspension that we're currently using, which is a Rosecrans connection of the student and family to Rosecrans substance abuse, a Rosecrans substance abuse counselor. So we're utilizing that in place of out-of-school suspension now. And we find that more often than not, families and students are open to making that connection and participating in an assessment by that counselor from Rosecrans. So I was just using it as a comparison to say, usually families are open to the recommendations that we provide, especially if it means that that's keeping students within school.
Right, and that's what I like about the recommendation. So this is, if I'm envisioning this right, it's a room that is dedicated where they're basically in isolation and they're going through their coursework and everything by themselves in that.
Yeah. As the proposal is written, we would have a dedicated room, a dedicated space at each of our campuses, and that certified restorative intervention specialist, that would be their home base, as it would be the paraeducator's home base. But both of those individuals would be in and out of those spaces, and that's why it's really important that we have two individuals in the spaces. They'll be making connections with student support team members. They'll be holding reintegration and reentry meetings, but the students would be in that space. What we're working through is what would be the instances that students would leave that space. Perhaps we'd be working with students on an individual case-by-case basis. So if we had a student that was assigned, this is just an example, an in-school suspension day, and they were engaging in project-based learning within one of their classes, and it was absolutely critical that they participate in that class, we feel like we might be able, through collaboration with the teacher and the specialist, to support that student in potentially attending that class. We're still talking about what physical education would look like. So that will be the student's home base, and we envision they will spend most of their time in that space, but there might be opportunities for engagement outside of that space as well.
Right, but they're supposed to be working under classwork.
And they will also have academic time, and we envision that there'll be more collaboration than exists with our teachers. Our teachers are great about providing work to students. We really haven't developed a framework that opens the door for connection and collaboration with teachers when students are serving an in-school suspension. So we envision much more collaboration from the specialist and the student support team with the teachers as well, and there may be opportunities for teachers to connect with students who are in that space as well. But yes, they'll also be part of their schedule, will be working on their assignments and their academic work as well. We may even have to utilize some of our academic academic interventions to support our students during their time in there. So the plans really will be individual plans that are built for each student, which I think is the beauty of this intervention.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I think that's great, but I do think that missing out on academics isn't the answer. That's why the whole suspension thing never made me feel comfortable, because you're only contributing to the problem, you know, you're making education more scarce for them. So what is supposed to happen? Is there a lot of counseling going on and reflective thinking, or?
There'll be individual counseling, there'll be an opportunity for potentially some groups, depending on, you know, what the combination of students in the space looks like. If students engaged, if there's multiple students in the space who may have engaged in behavior together, there might be an opportunity for group processing. There will be social worker connections. So there's going to be that social emotional piece, an opportunity for students to really reflect, repair harm, and that's going to look different depending on the situation. Also restorative circles, conferencing, potentially mediation if we have two students who have demonstrated peer conflict or peer issues as well. So it's really going to be nuanced based on the students that are in the space and also the situation that may have occurred.
Okay. So it looks like there's going to be, some counseling or tailored to the scenario going on.
Exactly.
And holding academics still a priority all at the same time.
Absolutely. There will be time for students to work on their academic coursework, and we're still talking through what that collaboration with teachers or our other academic interventions on campus will look like, but that will be a priority as well.
So,
Too, like, that's kind of the overarching purpose of this is to your point, Elvia, to remove that exclusionary discipline part and to support students on campus academically, social, emotionally, with support from a counselor.
Right, because we want to get to the root cause.
Right.
Okay, why is this
Absolutely.
happening?
And the prevention
and
work, too.
address,
100%.
Right, that's what, at the end of the day, that's what everybody wants,
Yep.
not take
Yeah.
away
Absolutely.
suspension.
Right.
yeah, so does this lessen the amount of time that the assistant principals have in dealing with these kinds of situations? So it goes to this restorative practices, teacher, coordinator. And so does it lessen the time that the assistant principals have in these kinds of situations, because they deal with a lot of behavioral?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I don't know if it lessens the time. They may have some shifting roles and responsibilities. We envision that our assistant principals, our associate principals, myself, our division chair for counseling and student support services will all play a critical role in the facilitation of this space, and also our work with the specialist that's in the space. I would envision APs will still be part of the intake meeting. They'll be part of the reentry, and honestly, they'll be involved throughout the process in terms of getting updates on student progress, because those students are still on their caseload as well. They have a counselor, they have an AP, a social worker. So I envision them being part of the team. But they will not have, there will be certain aspects that they may have done in the current framework with students who are in school, participating in in-school suspension, that they may not have to do, because we have a specialist who's going to be in direct supervision of the students and working directly with them through the reparation of harm, the restoration, facilitating their academic kind of progress throughout the course of the day or the days that they're in there. So that will be a huge help to the assistant principals.
Is the person you called them a certified intervention specialist? Is it a certified teacher who also has certifications in restoration?
It would be a type 73, so do you want to talk a little bit about that?
It would be a staff member who has, it used to be called a type 73 school service personnel endorsement, but that would be someone who either has a counselor, social worker, school psychologist endorsement in Illinois. So it would not be someone who simply has like a history endorsement.
Okay, great.
But we would look for, and we have a draft job description, we would look for someone who is adept to implementation of restorative practices and has a really great background in them. That would be the type of candidate that we would look for to be the certified person in these spaces.
Okay, and that's awesome. And you mentioned the in-school suspensions that are going on right now in a study hall. We're talking out-of-school suspensions. And Dr. Rowe, I really like the way you said, you know, instead of pushing them out of school, this is meant to pull them in. I think that's critical. Do you envision students who are either serving an in-school or out-of-school suspension are both going to be types of candidates for this?
Yes.
Okay, and then there's one FTE at each location.
Certified.
One certified FTE and then one para.
professional as well.
And so from a ratio perspective, we have room to have, I heard you say just by some of the scenarios that there could be multiple kids, but this room could house and work with multiple students at one time if necessary.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we feel very comfortable that the proposal and number of staff that we're proposing would be able to accommodate those two groups that you just referenced and do proactive and follow-up work.
Okay,
Yeah.
great, thank you.
And the parents are always surprised and engaged, obviously, right?
Oh, yeah, they will
Because
be
I did see that.
They
right?
would be a
Like,
huge part of the process of completing an intake meeting. And we hope by the end of the experience, the student will take some ownership in the reentry meeting after their experience and engagement within this program. But yes, the parents would be part of the experience throughout.
So how does this, when you're looking at, I'm probably not going to get the right terms, but the behavioral, you know, like how we've had for the state to make sure that we're in compliance? Do you know what I mean, like how does this fall into that? I mean, I'm not getting the right,
You're talking about the exclusionary discipline report.
yes, thank you. You always get the right name.
This was something that we included on that exclusionary discipline report. So part of the report is that we have to show our data of our students who are being excluded, whether suspension or expulsion, and break that down and then create a plan to what we're going to do to address all those things. So when we submitted the last plan, we've talked about kind of under the umbrella of restorative practices that we wanted to shift to having an on-campus supportive place for helping students work through some of the behavior infractions and get to a point where then students, if they do make a mistake, have trouble, that they're not reoffending, and that again, when students do have a behavioral infraction, that we can handle that on campus rather than sending them out. So this was part of the larger umbrella plan that we put together for the exclusionary discipline.
So would this be considered though, which is great, would this be considered though an in-school suspension on that plan when you report?
They don't count the in-school suspensions. Exclusionary discipline is specific to an out-of-school.
Okay, so that's, okay, so this is, the hope is by doing this, you would have less out-of-school
Yes.
suspension?
Yes.
Okay,
Okay, wait a
That's
minute.
part of,
okay, got it.
I'm actually confused. I thought this was to eliminate out-of-school suspensions.
yes.
But right now, Jill, you asked if.
It's
this-
for the reporting purposes is what I was asking for, like, how does this play into?
Like, you're talking about the ones that Brian sends out weekly, the suspension?
No.
No, or- I
This
mean,
would, this would eliminate, well, not eliminate,
Yeah.
but this has the potential to have a lot less of those, because instead of for us, in my district, we have level 3 offenses, you get 5 to 10 day suspension. If you choose to do this program, in lieu of those 5 to 10 day suspensions, you're doing our RIF program, which should be considered in-school suspensions, which would not be reported to the state as an exclusionary an out-of-school
Oh,
suspension.
this is independent, not here, you're talking about a whole different report.
This is the one because,
It's our discipline improvement plan that the board approved back in February.
February,
That's
okay.
per the State Board of Education. So we were required to do that based upon our exclusionary disciplinary data. So the goal here is to eliminate suspensions. However, I'm not going to say, and I know our team's not going to say that we will never have a suspension as a result of this,
Right.
because we don't know what type of safety issue might come up that
Yes.
would require an out-of-school suspension.
Okay.
That's all.
I got it, thank you.
so, in following up with that, like, what type of students, or what kind of incidences would you expect to be referred to this type of program versus like like a school safety issue would be?
Yeah, I mean, right now, our suspendable offenses are strictly physical conflict, fighting, drugs, and weapons. Like, that's it.
Significant safety-related
Those
situations.
three. So all of those, again, like what I just said, like I would say I don't want to say never, because you never know when we're going to come across a safety situation where it's not appropriate for the student to be assigned to this in-school room or to the room. It might require an alternative placement. It might require an out-of-school suspension to do that. So the goal is to eliminate, but we're not going to sit here and say it will always be the case.
You'll never not have one.
Right.
Right. But the
Because
goal
that's
is like
always-
somebody that you might be referring for a 3-day suspension,
Right.
this would be an appropriate thing
That's
for
right.
them. So then
And
that
to
would.
that point, like, the length of our suspensions now is, we rarely go more than 3. It's 1, 2, or 3 days.
Okay, and like how many times, like, is this gonna be logged then? Because I would want to make sure that it wasn't
Oh,
every
absolutely.
month there was somebody, their same kid was going here 3 times.
Yep.
You know, for, you know what I mean, something like that.
Yep, the teams had some significant conversations about that already, and what we would look at, and other models have kind of led us to thinking that if there's different behavior that's been exhibited, so a different type of disciplinary infraction, we would
Fighting
more than-
versus a drug.
Exactly, we
Okay.
would more than likely open the door for access to the space. If we had multiple drug referrals, we may have to look at something a little bit different in terms of programming or,
Okay.
utilization of suspension dates. We have not really gotten into a firm framework for that.
Okay.
But that is something that's on the team's radar. And this year's data, reoffense and reoffending is something that we have our eye on. We are using our social workers more in response to significant disciplinary situations this year. And we have very few students who have incurred multiple out-of-school suspensions this year. So this is a small number of students that have incurred multiple out-of-school suspensions both this year and last year as well. So and we anticipate that would go down even more with a restorative space.
And then that would mean that we were in compliance with the reporting and the discipline actions, and we wouldn't have to continue.
Right.
Okay.
I'm sorry, we've been talking about this a long time, but I do have a lot of questions.
No problem.
One of the things that I really liked reading in here is the counseling, the follow-up, the type 73 or school social worker, counselor, psychologist. I'm assuming that will be in your posting
Yes.
as such, and I'm biased, I'm a social worker, right? I would really encourage social worker, and I love my counselors and my psychologists, I really do, but for IEP purposes, if there are minutes associated with it and it's a special education student, that could potentially eliminate other issues down the road. And there's different trainings, of course, for those different roles as well.
Yep.
So that would just, if you can get a CDAC, a Certified Drug and Alcohol Counselor on top of that, which we happen to have in one of ours, is amazing to have. That's always a bonus. In talking with we call it Catalyst, our Catalyst program, and I work with them often and have for the last 10, 15 years. The one thing that they say is really important for them is not only, so for us, like I said, it's 5 to 10 day suspension. They do Catalyst for 3 days. And then they do the follow-ups. And so I love the idea of the follow-ups because when I talk to them, that is truly what they feel is the most important part of it is they see them for 8 sessions after that. And they said those sessions, those follow-up sessions are really critical to following their success, which goes to my next point of recidivism. I think everybody's kind of talked about that a little bit. I would encourage if we do this, which I'm a big fan of us doing, that we're tracking our recidivism rates so that we
Absolutely.
can see the effectiveness of it. We have, I will tell you, over 10 years, seen that recidivism rate be very low based on kids who have not elected to do our program versus those who have. We see a big difference in those not returning back to the table for an additional suspendable offense. So that was one of my questions, is recidivism. And then I guess that's the only other one I had was, have you guys talked about how many days based on the offense? Is it a standard situation, like is it level, based on the offense, or is it like this is what it is?
Yeah, we're looking at right now a 2 to 3 day experience, and that could be different depending on the offense, but we're still in discussion about that. So the out-of-school replacement would be a 2 to 3 day, and in school, right now, we're talking about just a 1-to-1. So 1 day of in-school would be a 1 day in the intervention room.
Okay. I think, sorry, that might be, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
love it.
And we
No, I
learned a
think
lot
it's
about the Catalyst program, which honestly, you can see aspects represented within this proposal, which was a really cool collaboration for us.
Great. Great, thank you very much. That's very important, and you've made a ton of progress and work towards this, and sounds like a lot of favor is coming here from the board. So we'll see this at our next meeting. That will come to us as an action item.
Thank you. Really appreciate your support. This is a really important proposal that we brought forward. So thank you so much, and appreciate the building leadership team's work on it. We get to present it, but they've done a lot of work on it, so we appreciate it.
Excellent. Well, thanks to all. That's very true. Thanks to all.
We'll come back.
Okay. Our next item is not public participation. It is finance. All right. Our next item is a finance item, and it is the review of bids related to the summer of 2024 facility projects. And I will start with you, Director Brian Stachak.
Actually, let me.
I'm sorry.
Let me jump in here. Honestly, this has been quite the journey, really about the last 18 months, going all the way back to September of 2022 with when we started the planning process for these projects. And so I outlined, Brian and I put together the thoughts for tonight's discussion. I think what we want to do is start with Ed and his team kind of talking just about the cost projections, the bid results. As we know, there was a difference, about 25% difference in the final cost projections when compared to the bid opening or bid results. We also know that over the last year or so, we've been fortunate to have a lot of discussions with our student staff through focus groups, with the board as well. I think the four most significant discussions that we've had here is really the February of 2023, when the broad objectives that came through in the community engaged process were discussed. Also, the identification of those initial projects. And then, of course, from February through the summer, the scope of the project changed pretty significantly in a lot of areas. And then, of course, last fall, we also added a few things with air conditioning and some other projects that came up in the fall. That led to a December discussion where the most recent cost projections we had were really those December projections. And so then we had a chance to open bids a couple weeks ago. And so I think in order, what I'd like to do is have Ed talk about the cost projections compared to the bid results. I want to kind of talk about the scope of the project and just kind of reiterate those, really the goal of this, and I'm calling this the first portion of phase one, right? Because this isn't all of phase one, this is just the first portion of phase one, but what we can talk about just the objectives that this project meets. And then I really want the board to dig into the potential options that are on the table tonight as a result of where we're at. And then maybe more importantly, all of this discussion tonight and any decision that's made really has implications on future planning as well. So I think we should discuss that at length also. But all that starts with Ed and Paul kind of outlining where we've been and where we're at. So I'll turn it over to you, Ed.
All right, good evening, everyone.
Hey, Ed.
Wish we had better things to share today, but I'll do my best to kind of talk us through what we're looking at. There's a lot of information, so stop me at any point in time for any kind of clarification. I think it might be a little bit helpful just to kind of talk about how we do cost projections, just to kind of walk through that process, which has kind of changed quite a bit since 21. Previously, we rely a lot on historical data. So we bid projects with districts all over the state, and we have ideas of what those types of projects cost. And we can usually rely on, or at least previously, we could rely on that information, pretty steadily, maybe 3 to 5% increases year after year. But once 21 hit, things got a little bit harder to predict. So we've taken a lot of steps to try and, keep a handle on that. So we're still working with historical data. We spent a lot of time working closely with contractors, which not often they want to spend time giving us budget information, but we have relationships. So, throughout this process, we're meeting with contractors saying, hey, take a look at these drawings. What are you seeing in the market right now? Give us some feedback. Are we on the mark from what you're seeing? So we're working with them closely and kind of seeing what they're seeing. But then at the end of the day, we really don't know until they start opening bids in that bid cycle. Last year, we had a lot of ups in the cost due to supply chain issues and those sorts of things. We thought that was the piece that stabilized, which it has. Those material costs really haven't gone up a ton. What we found is that the labor cost has been the big change here. When we opened up the bids, as Brian said, we were about 25% high. After our meeting in December, we started opening bids in that cycle. So we started seeing some of that real time. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but that's part of the reason we started introducing some alternates into this project, which we hadn't really discussed with you guys previously, but that was in an effort to be able to try and back some things out, should you guys want to, if costs came back the way that they did.
Can you,
Yeah.
I don't mean,
Yeah.
when you say alternates, what do you mean by like different type of work or?
So in the bid tab that I'll go through in a few minutes, you have alternate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
okay.
So you can opt not to do any of those, should you want, or delay them or defer them.
So broken down a little bit differently,
Yes.
so we could meet the dollar amount that we might want.
Correct.
But it's
So we
related
didn't
to the
put-
bid package, right? So
Got it.
how you put the bids on the street, it just gives the board a little more flexibility.
Okay.
More, rather than lumping it all into
That's-
one
okay.
project, and then you're kind of stuck.
Got it.
It
That's what I-
gives the board some more flexibility
Okay.
in terms of.
So that was kind of the intent as we started to see this, but, you know, we weren't expecting 25%. That, like I said, it's usually, you know, in that 3 to 5 range, or at least previously it was. Been kind of sick over this for the past week and a half, really trying to figure out where that came from. You know, there's two ways it happens. Either we missed something, you know, the scope changed and we didn't account for it, or there's some changes in the way that contractors are pricing things. And, you know, as we were going through it, we were fortunate enough to have a couple contractors speak with us and give us a list of the costs that they had for each of the trades. And immediately, the mechanical and the electrical numbers jumped out at us. The mechanical numbers are about 70% higher than they were even last year. And just like, really scratching our head at that, because we thought all the materials and that had stabilized. What we were told is because of the amount of work that's out there, especially mechanical as it relates to COVID and people updating their mechanical systems and HVAC, we know that you guys were doing similar things here, looking at it. That amount of work and the labor shortage, they were bringing in labor from out of state, they were bringing people from the union hall. A couple of contractors told me they had record years in terms of the work they did, and they lost money because it was inefficient. And so they were putting these premiums on their labor to cover this year's work, and so it spiked significantly. So that's a big chunk of that cost. It's pretty much mechanical and electrical. We see a little bit in masonry and steel, but those two numbers really stood out to us as where that discrepancy is. You know, we've seen it on other projects as well, so it's not just here, it's pretty consistent across the board, around 20-25%. We've seen jump from last year's numbers. We have a construction manager at another district, they were having the same types of projections, that's all they do, and still kind of fell in the same boat. It's an unfortunate situation, it's not meant to be an excuse, it's just, that's where we're at and what we're trying to combat here, but for the cost of the scope of the project as it stands today, that's what the market is telling us these things cost. And I can jump into the bids a little bit and kind of talk through some of that. So as you look, we had 6 bidders. Normally, I'd expect to see maybe 10. That also just speaks to the amount of work out there. For a job this size, we'd like to see more, but everyone is so busy. We got 6. We got 6 really quality contractors would be comfortable with just about any one of them, except for maybe one. And the numbers are pretty tight. So that means they're all looking at the same thing. So as we go through that, I'll kind of walk through what's in each of these things and stop me with any questions. But the base bid work that we have here, that basically is the relocation of the commons to the north side, the cafeteria and commons, and then relocating music back to where the current cafeteria is. That also includes faculty dining, that includes the drop-in center on the 2nd floor, that includes the collaborative spaces, the elevator for accessibility. It has a few bathrooms in there. There's more in one of the alternates I'll talk about in a moment. It provides mother room, roofs, that puts the chiller, the last chiller that you would need at South Campus in to finish off all of the air conditioning. So that's kind of something that you'll get a benefit in down the road if you do that now. Roofs, and then the courtyard addressing some accessibility issues. So, you know, the low bid on that is Henry Brothers. If we just did that project, I'm sorry, that one's Tyler Lane at the bottom there, very close, but that would be them for that bid.
Actually,
The alternate one, which is the toilet room renovation, that includes
You're right.
Renovating,
It would actually be Passion,
is it Passion on there?
26.9 Passion, yeah.
I gotta start wearing these glasses in my
Yeah,
pocket. I can't see
26.9.
this print.
They're all within, yeah, they're all right there, but 26.9 and change, but they're 26.9.
Yeah, sorry about that. So alternate one, that's the toilet rooms. That's the renovation of basically all the toilet rooms in the building. That's 20 toilet rooms throughout, so that includes bringing in some gender neutral rooms. I believe we have 3 of those included in there, but that's a complete update to get those all accessible, that, anyone can use any bathroom in the building. So that's a big one there. That actually came in pretty much on budget, pretty darn close to what we had, which kind of again speaks to those 2 trades. They're not super heavily on the mechanical system. There's plumbing in there and a little bit electrical, but those numbers kind of held because of that. And we'll talk about North Campus in a minute and what adjustments we might consider making here for those budgets, but the toilet rooms are coming back where we had expected. Alternate 2, that's the ticket booths at South Campus. That's where at the entrance of Bennett Field, there's already footings in place, and then expanding those and reworking the site work. That came back a little bit more than expected, and that just had to do with the expanded site work of ripping out the pavers and kind of reworking that whole section. So it's a little more than just ticket booths. That's something that you could probably wait on into down the line, and there's different ways to even look at how you build those booths. They could be much simpler if need be. The next one is E-Wing, so that's all the unit vents in E-Wing that kind of you get the benefit of putting that chiller in and running the piping by, that you can put those in. That came in under budget. The reason that's under budget is because some of that was still included in the base bid piece, so it's not like a clean separation. That's really just the unit vents to plug in there, but that impacts 10 classrooms and then a series of offices in that space too.
Just to clarify, the chiller is already going in as part of the base bid.
Chiller's in as
This is
part
the
of the
unit
base bid.
vents that would allow that wing to be air conditioned.
Right.
Off of the chiller, essentially.
Alternate 4, that's the doors. That is basically exterior doors at this building and at Vaughn Building, and it's due to a lot of them being in disrepair. If anything, we wouldn't say defer this forever. It would be something that you do want to address in the near future, but it might make sense to address it with work at this building, so the contractor's not having a second site superintendent they're paying, and there may be some benefits to doing that with work only at this building. That number actually is probably about on budget. About half of those doors are in the project at South Campus, so from the original budget for doors, we took the North Campus ones out and separated them, and then we have, I think it's 75 accessible, life safety doors throughout South Campus that are being addressed as well. I believe there was a question about what that entailed. Effectively, there's trip hazards, so when they have hold opens on the floor, when they're shut, you can trip over them, so that is a life safety violation. It's addressing that. And it's also addressing the fire rating on some of those doors. So if it needs to be an hour fire separation and it's not, it'd be swapping out the entire door to have the proper fire ratings. And those are items that are on your life safety list that need to be addressed at some point.
You know why there's such a huge discrepancy between some of these bids, specifically to this alternate 4? I mean, 142 the low bid and
Yep.
617 at the high bid. That seems crazy to me.
And some of them were getting different numbers back from the door folks. So that low one, he said, well, they only priced the doors, they didn't price the frames because they misunderstood it. And so when they're putting their bids together, they're putting in the one number and they didn't add them. So there was a little confusion in how they are putting their numbers together. I will say in conversations with these contractors, they would all honor their numbers.
Okay.
The lower one.
Doing all of the work.
Yes, correct.
So there's technically a conceivable almost 500 or whatever, $450,000 difference. So they're gonna eat that up? Okay.
I had that specifically. The unfortunate nature of how this works is they get numbers from their subcontractors, they put them into their bid, the bid gets awarded, and then they go and beat up on their subcontractor and say, I need you to give me a better number, I need you to give me a better number. That's shopping the job is what it's called. That's what they do, and so they would find a way to make up that cost on the backside. Unfortunately, it's only realized by the contractor, it doesn't come back to the district. That's just how they make their profit margins typically.
Good catch.
Ed, just a
quick point of clarification. You mentioned the doors at South Campus, the interior doors.
Correct.
Those are included in the base bid.
They are.
Right.
They are, in fact.
So the alternate, four does not include any of the doors that Ed talked about on the life safety list at South Campus. Those are already in the base bid. The alternate 4 is just for the exterior doors that were identified for replacement here at North Campus.
And then the last alternate, that is alternate 5, and that is the lighting in the field house and in the pool area at the ball. And that one came in substantially under budget. And that's one of those positive instances when we start to develop the project further, we're able to find some ways to save money. And so just working through some different manufacturers, we found some products we were getting better value on that were eager to work with the district. And so that one came in less. The existing lights are original. They're metal halide. It's a lighting type that we would never use today, and it'll be hard to find replacement fixtures for. The ballasts are pretty much done, so it's not like you can just go swap out light bulbs, and even if you did, it'd be pretty dim and not the proper lighting. So there will be some savings, obviously, through energy usage by the LED that'll go in there, and you should receive a ComEd rebate on that, too. I don't have that exact number, but it's probably in the $10,000, $20,000 range. So that covers all of the alternates. There's also an allowance in there of $250,000. That's just to address any unforeseen issues as we start to do construction. The biggest one that we always anticipate is when we're digging, if we find any soil conditions. But we would hope to be giving some of that back to the district at the end, because I don't anticipate using that much of the allowance should you move forward. Are there any questions on any of those particular alternates or base bid or scope or anything that I can speak to further?
So there was a recommendation made, was it you two?
Oh, was it?
Oh, okay, to opt out of the alternative 4 for the North Campus door and door hardware. But considering we're basically getting a steal, $450K cheaper because of their mistake, why would we not just opt to keep it?
And I guess the next piece here, there's really three scenarios here that we can talk about. Obviously, these are a little bit higher than what we expected overall, 25%. Option 1 is you do nothing with any of it, and you table it and push it down the road, and there's pros and cons to doing that we can get into. Option 2 is we say, you know what, we need to cut $10 million and we need to rescope this. So let's go back and change drawings and change the project. But you'd have to make substantial changes. It's not like we're just going to change the flooring type and receive any significant savings. It would literally be losing square footage or looking at the cafeteria in a different location or those pieces. And then option 3 is you could move forward with the base bid and then any order of alternates that you may want to move forward with, or none for that matter. So those are kind of the scenarios that we have. And yes, to your point about the doors, if you are interested in doing those and moving forward, there is a value to that for sure.
It's just a little hard to kind of compare looking at what our original costs of recent were versus then the different bid options and where they came out at. So I don't see where the total cost of what we had, say it was 34 million, but the bids now in these different scenario options came back at 38.
Yeah, really the best way to
or
explain
whatever the number is.
Yeah, it really represents a difference of about $6.5 million. So the base bid project plus all the alternates, we were projecting it to be about a $24 million cost, and it came back around 30.5. So the difference really in cost projections versus bid results were about $6.5 million. So what and to the point of my memo was, I think the important part of that discussion is what implications does that have on the second portion of phase 1, right? Which is really the North Campus piece. And the primary components of the North Campus project are the AC and the classroom renovations on the southwest corner of the building, the restroom and accessibility upgrades, and then the additional turf field at each campus. So I think that's what the board really needs to talk about, is the the potential implications of these bid results on the future part of the project.
Well, on this part of the project too.
Right,
Right,
because
right,
it's
right.
like,
There are
like,
some options.
yeah,
I mean,
you
when-
can't just like
when-
shortchange.
Yeah,
or-
no, I mean, I think we have to look at it overall. When we discussed these projects back in the fall, was it October?
Well,
Or before that,
really, yeah,
actually.
really like
Yeah.
June, February, June, September, and December were kind of the most important discussions.
Right. So there were several projects that I don't think the board was totally sound on. The one that jumps out to me right away is the new ticket booths at Bennett. But the thought was, let's go ahead and bid it while we're getting these
As
bids.
an alternate, yeah.
And at least then we have the information and we can make decisions accordingly to when we come back. Air conditioning, we've been working at air conditioning for a while now. There's a chiller put in the base bid, which it sounds like you're recommending we do that regardless. But if we did that, and I heard you say this, Ed, you could gain, the benefits down the road. So I think
Yes.
that is assuming that we don't proceed with alternate number 3 as part of this work too. So we really could approach this project itself differently to your point, Brian.
Right.
And allow us still some room to do what we want to do at North.
100%.
I think to Michael's point, at least from my view, like, I need something that shows me it all together. This is showing me a piece of it, but I need something that shows it all together from the way my brain works, that really kind of lines up the different projects and the costs, so we can understand and have a full discussion about where our give and takes could be. And-
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we provided some updates recently, which probably haven't made it to you yet, on the North Campus, specifically the AC spot, that part that's heavy mechanical work, obviously, so we adjusted that piece. The toilet room numbers are approximately the same, just based on what we saw. When we had the elevator issues in there, that held pretty much the same, so it was really the mechanical number, but we can provide all of that as a more holistic piece for you guys to look at, but really wanted to be able to just have some discussion today, because there's a lot here. I wanted to be able to answer questions before we just inundated you with a bunch of paperwork that, we could look at this a number of different ways, so.
I think when we first rolled this out, or when you guys, because I wasn't here at that point, when you first rolled it out, the cafeteria was still going to be renovated in the original space. We weren't doing anything with music rooms. You were looking at a cost about $7-8 million. Now we're doing all of that additional stuff, and it's changing it to $11.5 to $12.5 million. That's going to have an impact, obviously, on our costs. But
Well,
I got-
actually, just more than that, because that 11.5 to 12.5 was just the projection, but we know now that.
Now it's higher,
The bid results
right.
came in higher than that, yeah.
So I guess my question is, because when I took the lowest one in each one of the alternates based on the individual builder, I'm looking at least $200,000 less if we were able to parse those out. But I guess that's my big question. If we go with, can I take the lowest base bid and then pick and choose my alternates to be able to say,
You can pick and choose your alternates, but the ultimate low
Same
bidder
builder?
has to be, it's whoever's the lowest when you add those together with that contractor. So I can't take alternate from B and add it to guy A and then take the guy C.
So you decide, you decide
Right,
first,
right, I was-
you decide first what, if
Unfortunately,
anything, you
that,
want to accept, and then you add those up to get the
Yeah,
lowest bid.
but you can take any combination of those, it'll change who that low bidder is, and I think every scenario it has a different bidder, how you combine them.
And, sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
The only other thing I wanted to be clear about too is with these bids as they stand right now, if we said, well, we're going to, what's in the base bid? Okay, there's the cafeteria part, there's the renovation of the music space, the cooling tower, chiller, all of that. If we said, well, we're going to go back and pull one of those items out of that base bid, essentially we're rebidding at that point, because you don't have the same project any longer. And each bidder has already submitted what their cost, their thought processes and their cost. And so that would then, if you went back to them and said, okay, tell us how much it would be to take this out, now we're playing around with the bidding process at that point. So we would have to go back to redefine the scope of the project and then go back to rebid.
So that is where I was gonna go with that too, because one of the options that you outlined was go back and think about doing it in a different way. But what does that do to our window of time that we're working with. And then that's all part of it too then, because when we are playing around with that, that's, I mean, maybe not as much as fully rescoping, but you're messing with your timeline.
That's accurate, and it really depends on what, the end goal is. If it's start over entirely, yeah, that timeline is much different than it is if we pull out 3 or 4 small things, that's a little different.
Sure.
Can you just like define, like, because I don't think it's on here, define like base bid, like what's all on the base bid?
Sure.
So,
Because
yeah.
is that here?
Yeah, if you look at, so where it says results of the very first paragraph, the first sentence there outlines, so it's,
Page 84, the table.
That one.
yeah, I'm looking at 81, but I think your page.
Yeah, it's
no, go
underneath
back.
it's underneath the bids too.
Page 84 is a very good summary.
Right, I know, it's just saying broadly, but
Look, right below the
Actually, Michael,
table.
if you go back to the memo.
this one?
No, yeah, go back one page.
Here?
The first, yeah, see where the heading says results of February 22nd bid opening?
Yeah.
That first sentence outlines what was in the base bid.
Got it.
Okay, so just the total relocation
Yep.
and remodeling of the music department and the cafeteria and the commons.
Yep. So,
And the
yeah, so
loading
it's-
dock.
Yep, loading dock, additional elevator, courtyard renovation. So basically that first sentence. Then from past that first sentence, the alternate bids then are fleshed out based upon that.
So for the,
That's in the base bid.
on the bid tab, it says the base bid, the work shall take place at South and North, but it's really just the South Campus.
That is correct.
Yeah, it is. Well, I don't
that
know why
was
it's
the
in
last
North.
minute change.
Right, that's why I'm like,
Sorry to interject, the north is the door that alternate number 4 that you're
Yeah.
talking
Yeah,
That was the
But
only
that
part.
wasn't in the
of
base
it.
But that's not
bid.
right.
right, so like, but the phase 1 North Campus is not included in this base
No,
bid.
no,
Well, because I know we talked about like that was like kind of like the second year.
right, right.
But, so that's a total separate.
Total separate thing, yeah.
Okay.
That we haven't even.
And
taken
then we
out
haven't
bid
even
yet.
bid out yet.
Okay,
yes.
the goal of that would be
Actually,
out
not
to bid
haven't
in like
even like
September.
planned that.
Right.
So it's really just lines on a paper. So when we get to the North Campus part of this, the same process that the district went through over the last year, concept designs, focus groups, fleshing out all the what's the architecture, renderings,
Yes.
drawings, like developing that would all have to be, is all gonna have to be done for North Campus too, just like it was done for South Campus.
So consequently, you don't even have any projected.
I do have
For
projections
North?
for that, yes.
Okay.
Actually, I can speak to them real quick. Bear with me.
So, just so, before Ed starts talking, if you look at, it's the second page of the memo. So, you see the part, there's 5 lines that outline the latest cost projections for the second portion of phase 1. Does everyone see that?
Yep.
Okay, so now Ed is gonna give updated ones. So these were shared with the board back in December, so now tonight Ed has updated projections to those 5 projects.
So the air conditioning and modernization of classrooms, that's updating all the mechanical numbers and some of the renovation, that's 14 to 15. Now, what I will say about that, the mechanical portion of that, getting the air conditioning over there, that's about 8.4. So the updating of the classrooms could be something that's scaled over time that, we don't have to do every single classroom in that corner of the building on all 4 floors at once. You could do a couple pieces of it. We can do some other updates that maybe aren't as invasive that you could build on over time. So you're not losing necessarily that update. It just may take a little bit longer to get through all of those. But you can still get that mechanical piece done in the air conditioning for 8.4, which impacts a ton of classrooms. The accessibility, the elevator piece, that's remained the same. We haven't seen any real change on that number. The toilet rooms, I actually tightened that up a little bit to 1.5 to 1.6 based on the numbers that we received and looking at those square foot costs. So I still have a little cushion in there, but not as much as what we had here based on the numbers we received. And then the Westfield, that number has not changed either.
I'm sorry, Ed, what was the 1.5 to 1.6?
That's the toilet room stack at entry 3 and 4.
That's combined with the accessibility upgrades, those are the elevators?
The elevator is 500 to 600, and then the toilet rooms are 1.5 to 1.6.
All right, I'm sorry, I got lost. What page?
Yeah,
Are we
and
looking
maybe I'm
at
not looking at the same
82?
document.
Yeah, so
No,
I'm on the second page of the memo of the facility. So you see the,
Yeah, I thought I
it's the
was
page,
following you.
yeah, it's the page that starts with pending the board's discussion on
Yeah.
Monday. Okay, so right below there, there's 5 bullet points.
Right.
So Ed is, those bullet points were, those were cost projections from December.
Right.
But, so Ed is just kind of going through the latest.
Yeah, I
ones.
just-
Toilet upgrades are under the accessibility, like it's all, so that's breakdown we don't have, but that's,
Okay, so like the first one is 8.4 million, that's what I heard. The second one, the restrooms and accessibility, see, this is where I.
Hold on, wait a second, just to, you said 8.4?
So there's two, I was giving a little extra detail, sorry.
Okay.
So that number is 14 to 15.
Yeah, that's why I'm
But
confused.
what I'm
Yeah,
saying is
that's
I,
0.4.
if you just wanted to do the air conditioning component and then do a little bit less on the modernization piece, but still do some, the 8.4 is just the air conditioning piece. And then we have 6.3, is that right?
Hold on though, before we move on, does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, but it's like, that's not really like the plan that was like envisioned. It's like drastically different.
Well, it's, you would still do it, it's trying to
Right.
scale it, right?
Right, I know, but like,
And just trying to offer more.
no, I know, I get it.
I don't even,
yeah.
I mean, I just, do we even want to look at the second portion of phase one? Is that even relevant here, given the fact that the other stuff is so,
Well, I think it's really important to talk about the funding of this, right? Like,
Yeah,
because that's
it's a
gonna,
domino
that's gonna play into it. So, I think that's gonna play into the implications for this portion, but also the second portion, which is what we're going through now, right?
It's a domino effect.
right, it is, but like, I don't even know that we can make it to phase two. Do you know what I'm
Well,
trying
we
to say?
just want to
That's-
get a baseline. They have numbers that they updated
Yeah, I think
versus
that's
this.
exactly why I think we need to talk about the funding, because we believe there's a path to the second portion of phase one, but we just need to talk about the funding of that,
Okay,
right?
I
So,
hear it out.
Can you cover, just talk about the overall, so let me just start, and then I want you to fill in the blanks here, but we went into this with 3 funding sources, right? We originally projected $25 million worth of bond sale proceeds, but that became 27.4 because of, we actually did the sale. So again, these are all projections. We also know that the district spends $2.5 to $3 million per year on capital projects. So we've taken the conservative number and said, let's just allocate 7.5 total. So that puts us at 34.9. We also discussed the idea of using anywhere between $6 and $10 million of fund balance. That's what created the range of 40 to 44 million. So we, hate to use the term comfortable, but we are comfortable, based upon what we've talked about over the last year, that we can allocate 40 to 44 million dollars towards this project. Now, talk more about the fund balance discussion, because I think that's pertinent to this discussion. But I guess before we do that, what questions?
Well, you know what? Actually, I feel like we're going all over the place. Will you allow him to finish? Because I feel like we're broken. I think this is very important, and the funding definitely needs to be addressed. But can we just finish going through what he was going through? Because I feel like I'm getting all over the place.
Sure.
So, and just to clarify, because I had questions about the cost update, the North Campus classroom modernization, installation of additional air conditioning. You're saying if we just focus on the HVAC, on the additional air conditioning, that it would be 8.4 million with minor classroom modernization?
I'm saying that just the AC component is that. And part of that is because that's the driving cost piece that we found is it's the mechanical component. The total number there is 14 to 15, to keep it exactly as
Okay, that's-
intended.
All right, 14 to 15 for everything.
Correct.
Basically modified from 8.5 to 10, it's gone up to 14 to 15 million. That's the
Yep.
difference.
Right.
Okay, and that's kind of what I want to hear. Okay, and then North Campus restrooms and accessibility, you said there's no change there, or is there?
They pretty much held. I reduced the toilet room slightly just because it had some extra, I don't want to say fluff, but a little more contingency based on the numbers that we had with an alternate and an isolated cost for toilet rooms, which we just bid. I feel good with 1.5 to 1.6.
Okay, again, right here, you have overall 3.5 to 4.1.
Yeah, 3.5 to 4.1.
That stays, correct?
Well, because that doesn't include the,
Two different documents, that's.
Yeah,
that's
we
the
don't
trouble
that
there.
doesn't include the accessibility upgrades, which is the
The
elevator.
elevator, correct. Yeah, so in December, we projected that North Campus restroom and accessibility would be 3.5 to 4.1 million. But that includes restrooms and an additional elevator. So
Okay.
now, what were the latest costs you just shared for that project?
So I was working off a different sheet.
Yeah, that's
the
why we're
problem, is I don't
confused.
have the additional elevator in there
Okay.
because I
Right.
thought that was filtered out back in February. So that's, I'll update that number.
Right, okay.
Okay, so that's an IOU. We don't know
Yep.
if it's changed or not.
Meaning that overall 3.5 to 4.1.
That probably is a good number, because it's not having those particular trades that are driving the cost increases, but I will verify that for you.
That number should be pretty close.
Yes.
Okay. All right, yeah, if you continue, I'm on the same page. I think I just got a little confused with
you're
some
right.
of the terminology. Then you were, go ahead.
So the turf one, the turf ones haven't changed, nor have the roof. So all the rest are good.
The
Okay.
roof same, okay.
Effectively, we identified the heavy mechanical project, knowing that that's the driver, and then, a slight bump on some of the more intensive renovation that you might see in the classrooms. Those other numbers are more specialty and seem to be holding.
Okay, so overall, it looks like all of these items yield a 5 million difference in the upward direction.
I had 3.5,
Well,
but
because we did, well, sort of. I mean, I guess 8.5 to 10 million, that's really the only difference that I heard here. And now you said we go 14
No,
to
you're right,
15.
you're right. It would be
Roughly.
about that, yeah, roughly, yep.
Okay. 5 million
Yeah,
more?
you're basically talking about the difference between 10 and 15,
Yeah, I'm
right?
just trying to
Because
get a
everything
big
else was
picture.
pretty close,
Yes,
so.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
so you're looking at the second portion of phase one. Second portion of phase one, we're looking at a difference in projected cost of about 5 million from where we were at in December.
If we kept the same project.
If we kept the
which
same
we gotta
projects.
talk about.
Right, 100%.
Okay.
Okay, so now let's talk about the funding that you were headed that, can you describe that
Yeah.
40 to 44 start?
Yeah, so we've, throughout this, we've said we have a range of about 40 to 44 million that we can allocate towards all of phase one. 27.4 came from the bonds, two different bond sale proceeds in October and December. An additional 7.5 comes from, the district typically allocates 2.5 million per year on capital projects or facility upgrades, so we'll be able to do that over 3 years, 7.5. And then the range of 40 to 44 really comes down to the fund balance discussion that the board needs to have at some point, which is we've conservatively said we feel like the board could allocate 6 million to 10 million from the existing fund balance to add to those projects, and that's what creates the 40 to 44 million. That discussion, though, is always based upon the 5-year financial forecast that Brian gives every year, and which he's going to be giving here in about 2 weeks.
Okay.
So that's where you can talk more about the fund balance discussion.
Yeah, we were talking about this, actually been looking at it, and so right now we anticipate that we want to try to maintain at least 45% fund balance to revenue ratio, and really one of the reasons we're saying at least 45% is because in checking with Elizabeth Hennessy, who was here at our last board meeting for, she did bond sale for us, also our auditors, they basically said, look, 45% is a good number. Elizabeth has confirmed that most of the districts that are AAA rated for their bonds have between minimum 45 to 50% in fund balance to revenue ratio. So I think that's a good number to utilize, the 45% at, essentially, that being the floor of that percentage. Now, what's a little difficult about that is that number bounces around every year. And the reason it bounces around is because it's a percentage, 45% of fund balance to revenue. So revenue changes every year. And in fact, if you go back to our AFR for June 30 of 2023, there was actually $3 million of grants for building and grounds that was included in there. $2 million worth of federal dollars that we utilized for HVAC work, and then also $1 million grant from the state of Illinois. So what's going to happen is in 2024, that $3 million is going to come off, but we're going to replace it with additional, property tax revenue. We continue to have to watch the CPPRT number that we've talked about. So it's not a, here's the number for sure, right? So we have to continue to watch that. However, if we look at based on the June 30, 2023 number, which is the most recent number that we have, most recent concrete number that we have, and of course, we won't have the June 30, 2024 number till probably November, December of this year, that would leave us approximately $12 million of fund balance that could be utilized, which would keep us at that 45% number. Again, it's part of a moving target, so we have to look at that, but I think that's where we would be. Now, that also does not include if we have surplus this year, right? If we have a couple $1 million surplus, and again, I'm looking at that right now to kind of see where we think we're going to be, but certainly, again, that's a projection and not a final number until we get to June 30 of 2024, and then we look at our financial statements in November, December of 24.
What's the percentage right now? Or June?
Percentage right now was, I just had that number too,
57.3 or
it's-
something like that?
Yeah, hold on, let me,
7.8?
57.4 is what it was for June 30 of 2023. And roughly in those funds, it was $55.2 million. And so, as Dr. Waterman was talking about, with the bond sale dollars, I anticipate we'll be closer to probably $28 million with interest earnings over the course of time. And also, there was money in Fund 60 that is not included in the $55.2 million right now, because we're still utilizing that to pay for some of prior year projects, right? The projects that we had really in the summer of 23. And so when we're done with that, I'm thinking that we'll have another $500,000 to $1 million left over in that fund as well that we can utilize for the project. So there's a lot of moving parts, really, is what's going on with this. But if we said, look, tell us what you know, well, I know June 30, 2023, and that's what we know as of right now.
How long are bids for? Normally, isn't it like 90 days? I don't know if it's different for the school system.
It's 60 is written in the bid form.
60, okay.
Yeah, that's what they're required to hold it for. They'll tell you they have subs that will only hold numbers for a certain amount of time because prices are changing, but that's what they're bound to, so.
60 days. Okay.
And this new Construction Bond Act will have an impact on us it won't have an impact on us. That's just something have you heard about this?
I think you're referring to the new legislation, I think this is what you're referring to.
Yeah.
That talks about the amount of retainage that you can hold on to.
That impact us?
Yeah, correct. Where the performance and pay bond comes in, all that sort of thing. So the only way that's really going to impact us, I believe, is simply that we would normally hold 10% retainage throughout the entire project. Now, as we get closer toward the end, we have to reduce that to 5%. So it's just simply going to mean that we're going to pay out a little bit more money sooner.
On the front end.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah,
won't
and it's not going
impact
to be
that. Okay.
substantial.
But it sounds like we need to make a decision on what, it sounds like what we need to really be talking about is what alternates do we want to decide on? And I'll just speak for my own self. My focus is always going to be on accessibility, educational learning spaces, life safety, right? I mean, I personally am very easy to throw away that ticket booth as an alternate. I'm probably looking around and thinking most other people are, so that's probably maybe an easy one to get rid of.
Well, I mean, can we say, like, aren't we gonna need to add on, like, the architect fees and also the asbestos into this total?
Of the 44.
Right.
Like, were you guys, that's
Because this isn't in there, correct?
This is all construction only.
Right,
It's all
so I
construction
think that needs to be a part. That's why I don't see that we have the total picture.
No, I
like
feel,
right
I
here.
still feel like, I agree, Michael, I still feel like we need the Brian
Comprehensive.
Stachek overall view of projected revenues and funding sources and expectations with your, with 'cause all that you described today, but at a top level, and then we need South Campus laid out against North Campus laid out. We understand the two different timelines, so that we can see the total scope and we can actually coherently look to see where our potential give and takes are. Under one scenario, it sounded like you were going to say and maybe, if I'm connecting the dots properly, if we're looking at the total of 27, 37, 44, 5, that we could do it all, right? That's what I think you were going with it. But it would be nice to see that.
You mean with, no.
No,
Well,
no.
no, not,
We
I mean,
cannot do it all, no.
not North
Like-
not all of North Campus.
Right, remember, all this was done based on cost projections. So now,
Right.
I would even recommend that we don't even talk about the cost projections for the first portion of phase 1 anymore, because we know what that's gonna cost. So throw all those projections out and just work on
We
the
need-
bid results.
Right, let's work
And
on-
then now let's compare that to the cost projections for the second part of the phase 1.
Yeah, no,
And see
With
that
the,
as
with
one-
the updated
Right.
funding figures that Brian just gave as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the board can decide what can work.
I
within
think we
that.
could have a much more intelligent, coherent conversation where everyone can follow the numbers a little more easily. Because all the pieces are here, it's just hard to follow in this format.
Piecemealing,
Yeah.
But I do think I think agree with that chart, and I think that's one of the questions I had put in, I
just
I don't
didn't
have a
time to do
good.
it today.
Oh, I told, and it was me late getting it too, but I just think having that,
I can put that together,
a full picture of it, but I think that full picture needs to include the asbestos
100%.
and the
Separately.
architect.
Yep.
Well,
No,
right.
I'd say, it sounds like you want to
Itemized.
include it.
I think we need to have it
in there.
included, because
Yeah.
that's a
I
big
agree.
swing if we're talking $3 million. I mean, that's what we would spend for a year
Right.
on improvements, so I just think that's we need a full, really
view.
as accurate as we can get of a full picture to see what can we take away, because I agree with you, Tim, health and safety, accessibility, those kind of things are so important versus a ticket booth.
100%. And I think we even intimated that when we were going through the conversations, but we felt like, let's bid it out. We have it, and let's not only bid it out, but you guys to draw it out,
Well, and that one in particular was drawn a long time ago, so
Okay.
it wasn't even, you didn't even pay to have it
Okay,
drawn.
good.
It was
Well, we
just,
like
it's
that even
here, let's
better.
go get a price while we're here.
Yeah.
It's already
yeah,
done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that would give the board the view that we need to really go about this intelligently and make decisions. And because the bids are good for 60 days, we have a time limit of 3 years for spending the bond proceeds. I mean, it doesn't seem advantageous to start over in these regards.
It's only
That's
gonna go
really,
up.
yeah, so,
I would just say if possible,
Yeah.
if we cannot wait the full 60 days, just because I know the pushback we're gonna get, and there's other work bidding, and they'll start to.
For sure.
They'll start accepting other work, and then we put ourselves in a bind.
Right.
Yeah, I think we can understand that, but I think as soon as we can get that information, the board can look at that and then be able to come to decisions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we can definitely have that for the next meeting on the 18th.
yeah.
I have one question I want to get clarification on, though. Based on questions that were answered and had by other members on the board, it seems like there's about a 10% cost for architecture fees. That it was quoted at 2.4 million. So now that you have actual bids for 30 million, is that price supposed to go up or down, or?
So the way that it works, the contract has it as a percentage of construction cost. I've had this conversation with Brian, and Brian, my intention is not to make more money because bids came back higher and we didn't do any extra work.
I just wanted to confirm.
Yeah, so we've talked about that. We'll work with them to keep that fee, negotiate that fee back down or bring it back down.
Okay, so it won't be more?
No, that
than,
was just a quick off the cuff.
Okay.
At that number, that's what that percentage says. I don't intend to hold it that high. It'll be closer to what that 2.4, was it 2.4?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
which-
it coincided with the estimate of the 24 million that was projected in 2023, which
Yep.
works out to a 10%, which is
It's an 8.5.
more or less about the going, or
Yep.
the percentage that
Yep.
it tends to be. Okay, that's all I had, thank you.
Sure, absolutely.
The one item I did want to, again, touch on is that if you look at all of the alternates, they're $3.9 to $3.8 million roughly, depending on who the low bidder is. And so if you know, like you said, if we want to start pulling apart the base bid and start looking at that and saying we're going to parse these out, then we are going to have to go back to bid. So it's just a matter.
Yeah.
The difference here is what you're talking about is $3.8 to $3.9 million. That's a substantial amount of money. I'm not saying it's not. But the majority of that cost, obviously, as you see, is tied up in that base bid. So,
That
When
would
you say
mess up our
3 point,
timeline too, I'm sure.
what are you talking about, the 3 point?
so if you took
Million
the,
or-
the potential two low bidders, which are
Okay.
HAP and Henry Brothers,
Right.
and you simply added up alternates 1 through 5,
Mm-hmm.
you're at 3.8 million for one of them and 3.9 million for the other one.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the difference of the amount of money in the alternates that are
Mm-hmm.
there. And again, too, I know that we've talked about concern that, well, there are items that we'd be worried about in future years that, you know, are maintenance types of items. Remember, there are a lot of maintenance types of items already wound up into these projects. And so when you're talking about replacing air handlers, when you're talking about replacing plumbing in the washrooms, I mean, those are all maintenance types of projects. The roofing for the D-wing that's included in there, the partial roofing anyway. So when you look at a lot of those, there are a lot of the maintenance pieces that are already in this project that are going to be taken care of as part of that project as well. It doesn't mean that something won't pop up or jump up at us, because that happens, as we know. But there are quite a few of those items in here as well. Again, as we talked about, the alternate, you know, for the doors, that was a maintenance item that came up because I talked about it with our building and grounds team, and we looked at it and said, look, we do have a number of doors here that are aging and are getting to the point where they're, you know, the door frames are rusting, the doors are rusting, and quite frankly, they just don't look very good. And so, you know, that's how that one popped up there. So that truly is a maintenance item there that was never part of the bond project. So just to kind of give you an idea on
Right.
that.
Well, and and I think it's very smart and advantageous to look at those items when we're going through this work, we're going through the process. Some of it is the domino effect, but that gives us some latitude to discuss and really prioritize what we're going to do, you know, with the funds that we have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's been a lot of legwork already. I don't think we're interested in dismantling it or making it worse. I think.
No,
I don't think
they
we
just-
can.
Everybody just needs like
Yeah.
a clear big picture,
Yep,
a
we
summary.
can
and-
share that pretty quickly.
Yep, that'd be great.
Okay.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Paul.
On that.
Thanks.
And then I guess if we do have it in writing, a summary of the cost, updated cost, that would be great too.
I can share that as well.
Thank you both for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Our next agenda item is the board's continued conversation about the Willow Springs property. And we'll go to you, Dr. Waterman.
Yeah, this is, I guess my part, it was pretty quick, but a couple weeks ago, I shared with the board, we got one proposal back for the community engagement process. Shared that with the board on February 20th, I believe. So it's also included within your packet. So really, the purpose of tonight is for the board to discuss next steps related to the proposal and kind of what direction the board wants to take.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead, Jill.
No.
I was just going to say, do you want to give an overview of the proposal real quick, just to?
Yeah,
refresh
real
everybody?
quickly, the proposal is from FACO Research and Associates. They've outlined 3 different potential written surveys that they would conduct and 1 phone survey that they would conduct. They're not recommending doing all 4. They're recommending doing 1 of the 4. And really, the cost is dependent upon how involved it is and how many questions there are. So an 8-minute or 15 to 20 question survey would come at a cost of $21,650. A 10-minute, 20 to 25 question survey would come at a cost of $23,650. And a 12-minute, 25 to 30 question survey would come at a cost of $25,650. And then an internal survey online would be at a cost of $9,850. So again, they're saying those are 4 options, and they would recommend that the district move forward with 1 of those different options. So again, this is the only proposal that the district received.
Out of how many that?
We sent it to 6 different companies, and then our Gisco Coterman sent it to, they didn't let me know how many they sent, but they also distributed as well.
So I think that's really telling that we only got one back. And this is not, I don't think, as holistic as what I certainly would expect to get, especially for that price point. So I have to believe that the timing that we put is driving that. And so I would like to have a conversation about, eliminating that
Barrier.
August, eliminating that as a barrier, and then seeing, this doesn't give us what I think most, I mean, I shouldn't speak for anybody else.
No,
but
I.
This isn't what I
that
was expecting.
That was pretty much my main feedback. I'm like, I don't have a lot to say because I'm just looking at one person. I mean, it could be the best, but I don't know. I need to see then a poor one so that I could be like, oh, this is great. So I can't really, I agree with what Jill said. I think the timing has a lot to do with it. I mean, in fact, you even made us aware that a company straight up told you, I'm not bidding on it because of the timeline. So
Can't do it.
if we're doing this and that's what we have decided, then we need to go back to the drawing board. We tried, right? There was an effort made, but if this is still what we want, then I think we need to adjust our timeframe to see what is the best option to evaluate.
I mean, I don't know that it's necessarily maybe the timing. They could have proposed something alternative as well, even though our scope was what we provided. They could have maybe given an additional, like, well, if you consider X timing, then we could go with that.
Yeah,
I don't
I
think
would
that
love
this
that.
is like what I was envisioning to come back, just like this kind of a survey. I was thinking something more expansive. And so I don't think that this is the route that we need to even take, so.
Wait, I want to understand what you're saying, just so that.
So I'm saying that I don't think that we need to do this, because I don't think that we're gonna get anything of what we envisioned, or what I envisioned. It was more of a multi-pronged approach. Multi-pronged approach in terms of looking at maybe some kind of assessment here, but also looking at like some kind of a town halls that they could do, who was steeped in being able to conduct those kinds of sessions in that, with this kind of feedback that we were looking to get. And that was laid out in the proposal in terms of all of what we were looking for, and nobody has come back with that, so I don't think that we're going to be able to find that. And so I'm not in favor of moving forward with this.
I think to your point, it would have been great if they said, hey, listen, if we had an extra 2 months or an extra 3 months, then we would recommend ABC. I wonder if just an email, like the one that you forwarded to us, who flat out said, can't do anything in this timing. If that wasn't an issue, would you bid on this? And I mean, it would just be interesting to know what might come back, because those things would still be very informative, but I'm with you, like, for what they have here, we've done surveys, we
Right,
have a
we
lot of
could do
community
that.
feedback. This isn't getting us to that next step, in my opinion.
And maybe they came up with this because of such a crunch time. That's what they could deliver with that time frame. I mean, it's reading in between the lines as well and making assumptions, right? But, I don't know.
Does anyone else want to throw, okay. Looking back at the RFP, and, for me, this project of community engagement, to somebody's point that just said it, we've had a lot of community engagement. We've heard a lot from the community, and different facets and environments and angles. And I guess I'm just still wondering what our objective is in this community engagement project. Like, what does the board want out of this? Does the board feel like we need a yes, sell the property? No, don't sell the property? Sell the property, but, consider these ideas? Like, I think, in looking at the RFP, which I think you guys did a great job in scoping out the RFP, but to be honest, I don't know what we're looking for. And then you layer that on top of the fact that we don't, we've initiated the appraisal based upon how the property is zoned. We don't have those numbers to work with. again, I feel like the board has to be more decisive on what we're trying to gain out of a community engagement process if we truly are going to even go back to the drawing board and have Brian and his team go back to the drawing board to be very clear on what we're hoping to get out of it and why we need it, why it's important.
I think those are thoughts that I also had that got obscured with thinking of that. I think there's so many things to think about. I agree with what you said. I mean, what do we really want? Especially if we're having town hall meetings, right? What are we looking exactly to get out? You know, if it's a simple, do you want to sell, that's good enough, right? All the samples that were in the proposal they had very specific objectives. Like all of their work that they have to show for, that they prided themselves with, you know, those were very specific and related to what we're doing, but not really. They were more like.
It's a lot of work that goes for when you're
Yeah.
planning for a referendum. Generally, a lot of these engagement firms do this type of work when they're planning very specifically for referendum. That's not our situation.
No, I mean, I agree. So what is it exactly that we wanted from the community?
Yeah, for me personally, I feel like $22,000 to do a survey, like, we've done that. You did that in the very beginning of this whole groundwork for a brighter future project. We're able to do surveys. We had a town hall last week to get a community engagement on the construction. Like, do we need to be spending that kind of money? A. B, do we, I don't know. And again, I'm the new guy on the board here, so I don't want to speak out of turn, but I feel like we've heard a lot from some of the community, maybe not all. I think the message that we've heard is clear about zoning, but I feel like the rest of it is, to me, a no-brainer. We've got property that's sitting there doing nothing. Let's sell the property.
Yeah.
We're not going to use it. We're not going to build. I don't think we're going to create a track and field, right? That's not anywhere in our plans.
Yeah.
Let's sell.
Well,
Or let's at least do some surveys and some town halls independently without paying somebody to help hold our hand with it and then sell. That's just me.
Well, and I think our community put us in this position. We heard a lot of feedback from community on all different angles throughout the process. And, I mean, it was very clear, the feedback with respect to the zoning. So now we will have information on an appraisal at the zoned authority, like and how the property is zoned for. I think having that information is, to me, that's the next discussion, is having the benefit of that information to talk about whether or not we sell. We've not seen an appraisal specifically at that. We don't know how market conditions have changed and so forth. So for me, I wouldn't want Brian and his team to go back and do any more work on this engagement process until we see and have the chance to talk about the appraisal. And to that point, to your point, Tim, have a more stealthy conversation about what to do with this property, and if we're willing to do something with this property. In terms of I know you were just throwing out an example of building something there, and we spent a lot of time talking about some projects that we've been talking about for a couple of years now, and we have got funding source issues for them. So, I mean, I think it would be advantageous to get that information and decide how that property may or may not fit into what plans we have on the books right now.
Right. Well, to be clear, like, while we have some funding challenges now, when all of those projects that we were talking about before, that was all related to the bond sale. It was not related to being contingent upon selling the property.
The funding issues related to the bonds. Well, we knew we were expecting $24 million of bond money, right? But when we first
Originally projected for 25.
25.
The proceeds were 27.4.
Right. But when we did the surveys, when Brian and his team did the surveys back a couple of years ago, there were $131 million of projects
that
Right,
were
and
part of
that's
that
like the
long
total,
range-
right,
the
but
long
that's
range
like
plan
the total of all of
everything
maintenance.
that we knew at the time, yeah.
Right.
Not
it's-
the stuff that we are specifically talking
Right,
about right now.
that was
which
just
we've
total-
just said, we think we have all the fund, I mean, we definitely can, go into the
Right.
funds too for that. You don't want to conflate it, totally understandable, but there is more beyond, all of this too, so.
I can just say, I'm not comfortable voting on the sale of the property without some type of more of community engagement, whether that be, we do some town halls, we do something very specific to it, because I just think coming to a board meeting, when it's not really been posed, I mean, yes, it's been on the topic, but it's not really been posed, I'm not comfortable going forward and voting either way with it. And I originally had brought up the referendum question for that, and I know we had wanted to do some of this before we went to that, but maybe we just say, this is not going to work. We work on some town halls and then do put a referendum question out. I just think it's really something that has divided the community. It has, of all of LT, that I would like to hear all of the community speak for it in some way that's concrete before I would be comfortable to go through and vote either way.
I would just say my hope is that we can do some engagement and not do the referendum at all. I think that we should be able to come to a consensus with the people that engage, just to kind of throw it out there,
But I mean, I think that how do we throw it out?
Like that's what we should be doing.
I mean, I'd have to be very convinced that that was very inclusive, including everyone. Like, are we going to each of the feeder schools? Like, how are we doing that? I'd have to be really convinced about that rather than just saying you're gonna have a coffee here to talk about it. Where I feel like I need more. I don't know that this is the answer, because it doesn't seem to be, but I do feel like I need more to be able to go to vote to sell.
I'm ready to vote to sell because I think we need the money. I think it's been clearly identified that there are needs that the schools need. And we have, I feel it's a fiscal responsibility that we have to do something with the land that's not being used. And, time is money. I think we need to sell, and that's just my opinion. So I would be ready to vote for that.
Yeah, I feel like there's been times when we've held off sending easy communications because the sentiment was that they're available through our board recordings and through our board conversations. So if people are interested in that, they can tune into our board meetings and our board communications. In this particular topic, we've had lots of conversation and lots of opportunity for people to come, and they have. And again, I don't know what the objective would be with the engagement. I don't know what we would be expecting. We've already heard from the Willow Springs community, loud and clear. They were vehemently opposed to selling the property in a way that it wasn't zoned for. We heard at that time from many of our other residents from other communities, and I just don't know what I'd be expecting to hear differently from our communities now, personally. I don't know what our community members in Brookfield or LaGrange Park or whatever are going to have to offer. And then I hear that, Brian, you had, you and your team hosted a community event for people to come out.
Yeah, last week. Yeah.
And six people attended.
That was related to facilities, right?
And 6 people attended.
Right.
So I time is money. We've been talking about this a long time. My view of it personally is we come back to the meeting with the appraisal. We discuss the appraisal. And at that point, I think we have more information to decide what is the next step in terms of thinking about if we're going to utilize this property.
I mean, but at the end of the day, there's 7 of us, and I think everybody's expressing their views, right? So
Yeah.
I just have an opinion, but
No.
I think, right, we need to see if we have majority.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Olivia, and I do think that conversation would help kind of spur that conversation and get us to the point where we might understand what the next steps are.
Well, we'll have that appraisal information. That is a huge missing piece.
Yes, I agree.
So, you know, if it's $50,
Yeah.
then you wouldn't want to vote to sell, right? Like,
No,
so.
no, well, let me clarify. What I mean by, I mean, first of all, I've seen, I'm the new kid, the newest kid on the block, but I've seen the process evolve. And I've been on a roller coaster, one day feeling a certain way, you know, based on what I learn each time and hear each time.
Yeah.
You know, and today, that proposal was kind of like an awakening for me. And I've had mixed emotions, you know. I saw when Jill spoke, I was like, yep, that's exactly one of the things I thought when I was reviewing everything. I heard you spoke, I'm like, oh, I also thought that too. So I feel that if we were gonna go get a community engagement of any sort, it needs to be targeted. We need to have, what are we communicating? What exactly are we soliciting? And, I mean, it's been talked about so much. There has been opportunity for people to, you know, to follow, to speak. I mean, Brian gives so many updates all throughout that I would be ready to talk about a disposition, not necessarily, you know, move on to the next step of how to best, you know, do something with that.
Yeah.
You know?
But, I mean, I do know that, Brian, that you give a lot of updates, that's where it's at, but I'm gonna tell you, I don't know that all of the community is receiving those updates, and that's what I'm looking at, like my neighbors around who have kids in preschool and elementary school have never gotten an update on it. Do you know what I'm saying? It's not
Yeah, I
coming
mean,
through.
personally, I've not given an update on the property. Like,
No, no.
that's been, I don't know what the board
I
is
mean,
talking about right
from
now
the-
specifically,
from
but like.
ever though. They're not
Yeah.
like on the email distribution list. I'm like, are you guys on it? Because they always, it's what they're hearing like in the patch. So that's where, to not even know that we're discussing it, it's just coming from there. So that's where I feel like a community engagement is no one's taken by surprise of a better way to get that out. And we're not just getting out to one community, but to all of them. And that's where I know when we had originally, and maybe it's just, you know, you go to each of the districts and ask them to send those emails out or do something like that. I just feel like
Are you talking about like specific to the property or just in general about communication?
just specific to the property, like when we've done property updates. I don't know that, I mean, how many people do you have on that list?
The property updates go to everyone. So they go to the
Who's-
municipalities, they go to our feeder schools, they go
Are
to
the
our
feeder
alumni
schools-
database, they go to our current parents, our current students, our current staff, they go to everyone.
But are they going to, like if it's going to the feeder schools
Not
sending them?
necessarily. No,
See, that's
not
where I
necessarily.
think you have a lot, like, I mean, that would be like a really great ask, I think, to say, you know what, we're gonna have one thing, one more shot at that apple or something like that, if you will, and ask them to distribute that around.
So Jill, I want to understand, what kinds of questions do you want to ask to the community?
I mean, I
What
don't know
input would you-
if the property, I mean, it really hinges on the appraisal, but if the property comes back valued at 15 million, is that something that is something where it's valuable to hold on to it for another 10 years, thinking that it would go up? Is it 15 million to put in, I'm not gonna be great at the numbers coming back, because they've all changed so much, to come in to do two, is it worth it to sell that property that could be, we've always deemed it as a valuable asset, to say, to put in 2 turf fields? Or is it something where maybe we see, because it's not really great now with interest rates, things like that, that we see, you know, in 10 years, it could be worth 25 million, I don't know, I'm just making up
Well, I
a
mean,
number.
even for those are great questions, right? But I think even for that, before we go out to the community, we need to get the appraisal.
Correct.
And then we need to do more brainstorming and research. And then what we would need to do in that case is here rely on our expertise, do some homework, and present to the community whatever it is.
But
you
you're
know.
already saying you want to vote to sell tomorrow.
I want to move forward in general. I'm just trying to understand what's precluding you from moving forward. So that's why I'm trying to get, I'm just thinking
It's precluding me
objectively.
because I feel like this is like the most valuable asset that the district has. So moving forward with it without knowing from the community, are they okay? I mean, for example, my neighbor was like, I'd be so peeved if you sold that property for 15 million. I'd rather see you hold on to it. You know what I mean? Like, for that's an example, but I don't want to make that vote. And we haven't really heard from, I feel everyone, I mean, yes, they've had opportunities to come to the meeting, but some people don't know about it. If you're sending it to the feeder schools, that doesn't mean it's going out to the parents.
Right.
You know, I mean, and that's, so really, are we getting that message out? Or is it just, we're getting it out to not everyone, if that makes sense? Where there hasn't been a really big press release or anything like on that,
We
to
need
ask
the
for the facilitation.
Again,
appraisal,
like-
because that, throwing out numbers like that is part of
Correct,
the
that's-
problem. Because we don't have an appraisal for, like, the zoning, right? So why does somebody think, like, where does they just pick an arbitrary number, right? Like, and it's just, there's the appraisal piece, and then it's just worth whatever the market says. it's
Right, but if we
worth,
look at
right?
it, the market could say in 10 years, it's even that much more valuable because there's less land to build on. Those kind of things. I don't know. I just feel like I am not comfortable to move forward unless we have a full community engagement from everyone to know that we've done our due diligence to get that message out. And I know that you've sent the message out when you've done it, any update that you've had in the past. But like you said, you're sending it to the principals, to the superintendent, to the administration.
The superintendent, yeah.
Right, so it may not be filtering on down. So how do we
I mean,
get
I think
that?
that's a discussion, like, again, that all the communications around the property come from the board, so I'm happy to facilitate any communication from the board to anyone you would like it to go to, whether it's feeder schools, in district, out of district, like, that's a good board discussion to have.
But I think maybe we wait, because we voted as a board to get the appraisal, that we wait, because I just don't, I mean, I'm hearing Elvia wants to go vote right
We're
to
not gonna
sell.
vote right now.
I mean, that's where I'm like, totally not for. I'd like to get the appraisal back, and then we discuss as a board, do we feel that we have enough input, or what would make us all feel comfortable to make sure we have one more stab? And that's what I liked about the referendum question, is that for sure went to everyone that showed up to vote. You'd get the most coverage from that.
Yeah, I personally am not in favor of a referendum question at all. I hear what you're saying, in terms of community input. And, but what I hear consensus from everyone, we can't vote, we wouldn't be voting on this tonight anyway, because it's not an action item. And so we can't take action on an item that wasn't positioned as an action. So there was no intention to vote or anything related to this conversation about voting tonight, just to make that very clear. What I'm hearing consensus on is that everyone finds value in the appraisal. That's already been initiated, and that when that appraisal comes back, we bring it back to the board meeting and can have another conversation about what everyone feels should be next steps at that point. And we can put it on the agenda as the consideration of action, so that if the board does want to take action, we can do so. If the board doesn't want to take action, we won't have to.
Consideration of action for what?
Like, for consideration of
The next steps.
of the Willow Springs property, right? We've written agenda items.
Yeah, I would just caution that. I mean, the board has already been through that process in December of 2022.
Yeah.
And know how involved that is. That involves a closed session discussion with adopting a resolution,
Oh, right,
setting
yeah.
terms and conditions, with approving a minimum price, all that. So if you're suggesting the board could possibly be ready for that
Yeah,
the
we
next
can't.
meeting, I would caution the board against
No,
that.
you're
But again, this is a
exactly
board
right.
decision, so if you
No,
guys
no,
want to move forward that
you're exactly
direction.
right. What
yeah.
the board could do at that time is to decide that it wants to pursue writing terms and conditions for the property, and then accordingly take the legal steps to do that.
Yeah, there wouldn't be any action required one way or the other.
Right.
For that. It would just be a discussion, and then if the consensus of the board was to move forward out of that, then we would go through the exact same process we went through in December of 2022.
But I think we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves in terms of, it sounds like everybody is very comfortable with waiting for the results of the appraisal and having a next conversation.
Yeah, I just want to ask a question though, because I don't want to assume anything. The referendum question is exactly what? Referendum for what? I just want to, I don't want to assume anything.
My suggestion was to pose it to the community, and I think that we were allowed 3 referendum questions, was that correct? To propose it to all of the LT voting community about selling the land.
So I guess maybe I'm confused about the referendum, the definition of a referendum. If
thought a referendum, isn't it when you're asking for like taxes to go up?
Could
because
be.
money-
A referendum is just a question. The traditional definition of how most districts use a referendum is asking for a tax increase.
Okay,
But
that's
it's
probably-
also possible for districts to ask an advisory referendum, which is just a question. It's a question of the community. It's non-binding, it's just an advisory question.
Oh, that's why you kept using.
So I think the board has used that term referendum in this context, but not within the traditional sense of asking for a tax increase. It's really been more for the advisory referendum question, to get feedback.
Okay.
And I just felt like that was the most inclusive way to get a response from the whole community, because we represent the whole community as to, I mean, I'm not the lawyer here to make up the question, but I just would envision something like, do you want to sell the property for X, which it appraised at, yes or no? Do you know what I'm saying? Something like and I would view our job as a district of having different town halls, educating people, making sure everybody heard about it, knowing that this was going to be on the ballot. And then that would be a much easier vote for me, knowing that we've heard from everybody, because maybe at 15, I'm just throwing out a number,
Yeah.
not knowing that we don't have it back, but like Jill had said, $50. Well, at $50, it's clear nobody would really want to sell the property for $50. But if it came back residential at 25, maybe that would be a different conversation to have. So that's where I just feel like we've had so much back and forth with, we hear from people, we don't hear from people, but then we don't know that everyone's gotten it. So that's why I just feel really comfortable with that.
And you're allowed, you said 3 questions for the referendum?
Yeah, I'd have to ask our counsel on that. I mean, there's a process that boards have to go through to put a question on the ballot. We do know that in the next available opportunity is November, and the board would have to make a decision on that by August 19th.
That's the August 19th,
Yeah.
that time, okay.
But I don't want to speak to the,
Advised against it when they
Yeah.
came here.
I don't want to speak to
Earlier.
like the number.
I
or the
didn't take it
legality.
that they advised against it. He just said
Oh, I
that
thought he said, like almost verbatim, that wouldn't be our recommendation.
I didn't take that. I took it that he would recommend that we would be bound by it. He would recommend that it would be hard for us to deviate from what it came from.
I guess I did interpret him saying those weren't the best I guess it wasn't the best vehicle to use to get the input that we were seeking.
I was reading it that way too.
Yeah.
That it didn't seem like that was advised. Like other districts, they don't do that because based on how you word the question and responses, what are you gonna do with the information? I interpret it as that it's not a great way to get the information that you need. I think if we're feeling like we need more input, I'm all for those town halls. I'm all for surveys. I'm all for those other things. But again, I think to the point that's been made already, we're putting the cart before the horse. We probably need to have further conversation down after we get the appraisal. I think the other thing I feel like we've all agreed on is that we don't want this proposal for the.
I think I would agree with that.
Right.
I think we're all in agreement.
So I don't know if there is anything that needs to be communicated to them or not. I would just let that run out at 60 days and we're done with it, but.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm happy to communicate with them that the board's not interested in accepting the proposal or moving forward.
Okay, so we'll bring this conversation back when we have the appraisal.
So just to clarify, there's no additional steps needed from my perspective on either this RFP or other RFPs. It's,
No, it is done.
the board will put this back on the agenda for March 18th and continue to discuss it.
Did you have an ETA on the appraisal?
Should be very soon.
Okay.
Okay, now is the second public participation.
Nobody
comment?
signed up.
Nobody has signed up. Okay, with that, we will, the board will be adjourning to closed session at this time. The board will move back into closed session for the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees, specific individuals who serve as independent contractors in a park, recreational, or educational setting, or specific volunteers of the public body or legal counsel for the public body, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee, a specific individual who serves as an independent contractor in a park, recreational, or educational setting, or a volunteer of the public body or against legal counsel for the public body to determine its validity, and that's Illinois State Code 5-122C1. The board will not be taking action after this closed session. Can I have a motion to move into closed session?
So moved.
Second?
Marilyn, will you please call the roll?
Member Rita Daniels?
Yes.
Member Gretsch?
Yes.
Member Nava?
Yes.
Member Thomas?
Yes.
Member Alboris?
Yes.
Member Robert?
Yes. Thank you all for coming.
Let's take a 5-minute break, yeah?
Yep.